I am Jada, 34 years old, and for the last 5 years I have let my family believe a lie. They think I am a struggling freelance writer, scraping by on minimal wage. They do not know that I am the silent owner of Onyx Logistics, the largest supply chain firm on the East Coast. I keep my wealth hidden because I wanted to see who they truly were when they thought I had nothing. That Thanksgiving, the truth came out in the most brutal way possible. The snow was falling heavily as I maneuvered my 10-year-old Honda Civic down the winding driveway of the estate in Greenwich. The car rattled and shook with every turn, a perfect disguise for the woman I had become. My daughter Maya sat in the back seat, clutching a small homemade card she had made for her grandmother. Her eyes were bright with the innocent excitement that only a child possesses on a holiday. She did not understand why we visited these people who treated us like ghosts, but she loved them anyway. I parked the car far away from the entrance, tucked behind a row of hedges, so it would not be an eyesore next to Hunter's leased BMW and my parents' Mercedes. I took a deep breath and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wore a simple gray sweater and worn-out jeans, purposely chosen to play my part. I gripped the steering wheel for a moment, reminding myself to stay calm. "Just get through dinner," I whispered to myself. For Maya. I stepped out into the biting cold and opened the back door for my daughter. The wind was howling, but the lights from the house cast a warm, inviting glow onto the snow. It looked like a picture-perfect postcard of the American dream, but I knew the nightmares that lived inside. We walked up the stone path, snow crunching under our boots. Before I could even ring the doorbell, the heavy oak door swung open. It was Hunter, my brother-in-law. He was a tall white man with a jawline that he thought made him look distinguished, but only made him look arrogant. He was wearing a suit that cost more than what he thought I made in a year. He did not step aside to let us in. He stood right in the center of the doorframe, blocking the warmth from reaching us. "Well, if it isn't the charity case," Hunter said, his voice dripping with that casual cruelty he had perfected over the years. "You are late, Jada. But I guess when you drive a piece of junk like that, punctuality is just a suggestion." Maya stepped forward, holding up her card, smiling up at him. "Hi, Uncle Hunter. Happy Thanksgiving." Hunter looked down at her, not with affection, but with the kind of look one gives to a stray dog that has wandered onto a clean porch. He looked at her boots, which were wet with melting snow. Then he looked at my boots, which were old and scuffed. "Stop right there," he commanded, raising a hand. "Do not take another step." I felt my spine stiffen. "It is freezing out here, Hunter. Let us inside." "Not with those shoes on," he sneered. "Those are filthy. My mother-in-law just had these Persian rugs professionally cleaned for tonight. We have a very important guest coming, a CEO who could change my entire career. I will not have you tracking mud and the smell of failure into this house. Take them off here, outside on the porch." I stared at him. It was 20 degrees below freezing. "You want my 8-year-old daughter to take her shoes off in the snow." "I want you to learn some respect for other people's property," Hunter replied, crossing his arms. "But I suppose respect is hard to learn when you are used to living in squalor. Leave the shoes on the mat outside or get back in your car and leave. It makes no difference to me." Maya looked at me confused and shivering. "Mommy, my toes are cold." I knelt down and unzipped her boots, my hands shaking, not from the cold, but from a rage so hot it could have melted the snow around us. "It is okay, baby," I whispered. "We will go inside in a second." I placed our boots neatly on the freezing concrete mat. Hunter watched us with a smirk of satisfaction, as if humiliating us was the appetizer for his holiday feast. "You know, Jada," he said as we stepped into the foyer in our socks. "Maybe if you worked as hard as you pretend to, you could afford a pair of shoes that didn't look like they came from a dumpster. But I guess some people are just born to be bottom feeders." I did not respond. I simply walked past him, entering the house that technically belonged to a trust fund under my control. A house he was living in rent-free because of my mercy. Mercy that was running out by the second. The living room was suffocatingly warm and smelled of roasted turkey and expensive perfume. My parents, Desmond and Shirley, were sitting on the velvet sofas surrounding my younger sister, Chanel. The scene looked like a shrine dedicated to the golden child. Chanel was lounging like a queen, her hand resting dramatically on a bright orange handbag. "Oh my God, look who finally decided to show up," Chanel said without getting up. Her voice was high-pitched and theatrical. She waved a hand in our direction. "Jada, you look tired. And is that the same sweater you wore last Christmas? God, you really need to update your wardrobe. It is embarrassing." My mother, Shirley, stood up, but she did not come to hug me or Maya. She walked over to Chanel and adjusted the strap of the orange bag. "Oh, ignore her, Chanel, honey. Not everyone has your sense of style, or your husband's generosity. Look at this bag, everyone. Genuine Hermes. Hunter is such a good provider." I glanced at the bag. Even from 10 feet away, I could see the stitching was uneven, and the leather was too shiny. It was a high-quality fake, probably bought in Chinatown for $200. But I said nothing. I just held Maya's hand. "Grandma, look what I made for you," Maya said, stepping forward, extending the card. My mother barely glanced at it. "That is nice, dear. Put it on the table by the door. I do not want clutter on the coffee table right now. We need everything to look pristine." My father, Desmond, looked up from his newspaper. He scanned me from head to toe, his eyes full of disappointment. "Jada, why is your hair like that? You look like a bird's nest. We have a VIP coming tonight." "Mr. Sterling, he is the CEO of the biggest tech firm in the state. I told you to make an effort. You are making this family look bad." I smoothed my hair back, keeping my face neutral. "I am fine, Dad. We are just here to eat and leave." "Well, make sure you do more leaving than eating," my mother snapped. She turned back to Chanel, beaming. "Tell me again how much the bag costs, sweetie? 5,000? 10,000, Mom?" Chanel lied effortlessly. "Hunter says I deserve the best because I carry the family name so well. Unlike some people." She shot a glare at me. I sighed and moved toward the empty armchair in the corner of the room, just wanting to sit down and warm my frozen feet. "Stop!" my mother shrieked, lunging forward as if I was about to sit on a landmine. I froze halfway down. "What is the matter? Get up! Get up right now!" she hissed, pulling me by the arm. "Are you insane? That armchair is reserved for Mr. Sterling. That is the best seat in the room. We cannot have it sagging because you sat in it with your damp clothes." I stood up straight, pulling my arm away from her grip. "So, where do you want us to sit, Mother?" She looked around the room as if trying to find a place to dispose of unwanted trash. She pointed toward the kitchen where the servants' entrance was. "There are 2 folding chairs in the pantry. You and the child can sit in the kitchen. We do not want you crowding the living room when the adults are talking business. Besides, Maya is too loud. Mr. Sterling hates children." I looked at my father, hoping for some defense. He just turned the page of his newspaper and muttered, "Listen to your mother, Jada. Know your place." My place. I looked at the luxury furniture I had paid for. I looked at the crystal chandelier I had selected. I looked at the family that was eating my food, living in my house and treating me like a parasite. I squeezed Maya's hand. "Okay," I said softly. "We will go to the kitchen." As we walked away, I heard Hunter whispering to Chanel, "See, I told you she has no spine. She is born to serve." I sat Maya down on a cold metal chair in the kitchen and handed her a glass of water. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my bank. The automatic transfer for the mortgage payment on this house was scheduled for tomorrow morning. I opened my banking app and my finger hovered over the cancel button. Not yet, I thought. I need them to dig the hole a little deeper. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The energy in the living room shifted instantly. I could hear my mother frantically fluffing pillows and Hunter clearing his throat. "He is here," Hunter announced, his voice trembling with excitement. "Everyone stand up! Show some class!" I watched from the shadows of the kitchen doorway as Hunter threw open the front door. A tall, imposing man with silver hair walked in, shaking off the snow. It was Mr. Sterling. The man Hunter worshipped, the man my parents were terrified of, and the man who had been begging for a meeting with me for 6 months. Hunter bowed slightly, almost pathetic in his eagerness. "Mr. Sterling, welcome. Welcome to my humble home. Please come in. We have the best seat in the house ready for you." Mr. Sterling walked in, his eyes scanning the room. He looked bored, unimpressed by the fake luxury. "Thank you, Hunter," he said, his voice booming. "I can only stay for a moment. I just wanted to drop off the paperwork before the holiday." Of course, of course." Hunter guided him toward the living room. "Please sit. My wife Chanel has been dying to meet you, and my parents—" Mr. Sterling walked past them, ignoring Chanel's extended hand. He was walking straight toward the kitchen. He stopped right in the doorway, staring at me, sitting on the folding chair next to the trash can. Hunter laughed nervously, rushing over to block his view. "Oh, I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling. Please do not look over there. That is just the help. She is a bit slow. We let her eat the leftovers in the kitchen out of charity." Mr. Sterling did not move. He squinted his eyes, looking at me closely. The silence in the room became heavy. He looked at Hunter, then back at me, then at the Onyx Logistics logo on the screen of the phone I was holding. "The help?" Mr. Sterling asked, his voice dropping an octave. "Hunter, are you telling me that you put Jada regarding her as the help?" Hunter looked confused. "Yes, sir. She is just my wife's sister. She is a nobody. Why? Do you know her?" Mr. Sterling laughed, but it was a cold, dry sound. "Do I know her? Hunter, you idiot! This is the woman who owns the supply chain that keeps your entire department running. This is the woman I have been trying to impress so she doesn't bankrupt us." The entire room went dead silent. My mother dropped the wine glass she was holding. It shattered on the floor, but no one looked at it. All eyes were on me. I slowly stood up from the folding chair and walked into the living room. I didn't look at my parents. I looked straight at Hunter. "I think you are in my seat, Hunter." And that was just the beginning of the end. The atmosphere in the living room shifted instantly the moment Mr. Sterling walked through the door. It was pathetic to watch my family transform from abusive tyrants into desperate sycophants in the blink of an eye. My mother, Shirley, smoothed down her dress and put on a smile so wide it looked painful. Hunter adjusted his tie and rushed forward, extending his hand with a level of enthusiasm that smelled like desperation. Mr. Sterling was a man who commanded a room without raising his voice. He was wearing a cashmere coat that probably cost more than Hunter's car, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who actually possessed power, rather than someone who just pretended to have it. He shook Hunter's hand firmly, but briefly, his eyes already scanning the room, assessing the environment. "Welcome, Mr. Sterling," Hunter said, his voice pitching slightly higher than normal. "We are so honored you could join our humble family gathering. Please let me take your coat." "Thank you, Hunter," Mr. Sterling replied, handing over the garment. "I cannot stay long, as I have my own family waiting in the Hamptons, but I wanted to drop off those contracts personally." Of course," Hunter said, guiding him into the center of the room. "I want you to meet the family. This is my mother-in-law, Shirley, and my father-in-law, Desmond." My parents practically bowed. "It is a pleasure, sir," my father said, using his most formal voice. "We have heard so much about your visionary leadership." "And this," Hunter continued, placing a hand on the small of Chanel's back, pushing her forward like a prize pony, "is my beautiful wife, Chanel. She is the creative force behind this home. She runs a very exclusive boutique interior design firm in the city." I stood in the corner, holding a tray of appetizers, and I almost dropped it. Interior design firm? My sister had not worked a day in 3 years. Her only design experience was scrolling through Pinterest and buying knockoff decor that looked expensive from a distance, but felt cheap to the touch. But Chanel played the part perfectly, extending her hand with a delicate wrist. "Oh, stop it, honey," Chanel giggled. "I just have an eye for beauty, Mr. Sterling. It is so lovely to meet you." Mr. Sterling nodded politely, but I saw his eyes flick toward the gaudy gold curtains my mother had insisted on. He did not look impressed. Then his gaze landed on me. I was standing by the kitchen door, trying to make myself invisible for the sake of my daughter. Maya was watching me from the hallway, and I needed to keep the peace for 1 more hour. Mr. Sterling looked at me, expecting an introduction. Hunter stiffened. He stepped in front of me, trying to block Mr. Sterling's view, but realized it was too late. He had to explain my presence. A look of pure panic crossed his face before he settled on a lie that was so insulting it took the air out of my lungs. "And this," Hunter said, waving a dismissive hand in my direction, "is Jada. She helps us out around the house. You know, cleaning, serving, that sort of thing. We like to provide work for the less fortunate during the holidays. It is our way of giving back to the community." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother sipped her wine, looking away. My father stared at the floor. Chanel smirked behind her glass. They had just reduced me, their daughter and sister, to a charity case, a hired servant. I felt a fire ignite in my chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out my phone and show them the bank account that could buy and sell everyone in this room. But I looked at Maya's scared little face and I swallowed my pride. I stepped forward and held out the tray. "Would you like a canapé, sir?" I asked, my voice steady and cold. Mr. Sterling looked at Hunter, then he looked at me. He did not treat me like a servant. He looked me directly in the eyes with an intensity that made Hunter nervous. He reached out and took a glass of champagne from my tray, but he did not drink it immediately. He tilted his head slightly, studying my face, as if he was trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Thank you, Jada," he said. His voice was thoughtful. He ignored Hunter's nervous laughter and took a step closer to me. "You know, you look incredibly familiar," he said, narrowing his eyes. "Hunter said you are the help, but I could swear I have seen you before. Perhaps in a boardroom in Manhattan? Or was it on the cover of Forbes last month?" Hunter let out a loud, forced laugh that sounded like a bark. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, you are too kind. Jada in a boardroom. That is rich. No, she has never stepped foot in a corporate office. She is very simple-minded, really." Mr. Sterling did not laugh. He kept his eyes locked on mine, and for the first time that night, I saw a spark of recognition flash behind his pupils. "Is that so?" he murmured. "Because you look exactly like someone I have been trying to get a meeting with for 6 months." My heart hammered against my ribs. The mask was slipping, and the show was about to get very interesting. "Dinner is served, ladies and gentlemen. Please take your seats," my mother announced, clapping her hands like a conductor orchestrating a symphony. The dining room was, indeed, a spectacle. The mahogany table which I had anonymously purchased for them 2 years ago was set with fine bone china and crystal goblets that sparkled under the dim lights. A massive, golden roasted turkey sat in the center, steaming and smelling of sage and rosemary. It was a masterpiece of a meal. But as the family and Mr. Sterling moved toward the table, I noticed something immediately. There were only 6 chairs. We were a party of 8. Hunter ushered Mr. Sterling to the head of the table, seating him with the reverence of a king. My parents and Chanel quickly claimed the spots next to him, leaving no space unused. I stood holding Maya's hand, waiting for someone to bring in extra chairs. Instead, Hunter turned to me with a look of mock apology that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, shoot, Jada," he said, snapping his fingers. "I completely forgot to mention that the dining set only seats 6. We didn't want to squeeze everyone in like sardines. It would ruin the ambiance for Mr. Sterling." He pointed a thumb over his shoulder toward the swinging door of the kitchen. "There is plenty of counter space in the back, or you can use that folding table near the pantry. It is cozy back there, and you will be out of the way while we discuss business." I felt Maya squeeze my hand tighter. "But Uncle Hunter," she said, her voice small, "I want to sit with Grandma." Hunter ignored her. Before I could protest, he reached for a small side table where a pot of pumpkin soup had been sitting. It was not the fresh, steaming pot on the main table, but a smaller stainless steel one that looked like it had been sitting out for hours. He ladled some into a chipped bowl and shoved it into Maya's hands. "Here you go, kiddo," he said. "Start with this. We will bring you some bread rolls later if there are any left." I ushered my daughter into the kitchen, away from the warmth of the dining room. The spot Hunter had indicated was right next to the overflowing garbage can where they had tossed the vegetable peelings and raw turkey neck. The smell of rotting onions mixed with the cold draft from the back door was nauseating. Maya looked down at her bowl. The soup was visibly congealed, a cold orange sludge with a film forming on top. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes filling with tears. "Mommy," she whispered loud enough for the other room to hear, "why is my soup cold? And why can't I have any turkey? I can see it from here. It looks so good." The dining room went quiet. I expected my mother to step in to offer her granddaughter a plate. Instead, I heard the clinking of silverware and then Chanel's voice drifting through the open door, sharp and amused. She didn't even turn around. "Oh, Maya, honey," she called out, her tone dripping with condescension. "Turkey is a premium meat. In this house, we have a rule. The turkey is for the people who contributed money to buy the turkey. Maybe tell your mommy to get a real job, and next year you can have a wing." Laughter erupted from the table. Even my father chuckled, finding his daughter's cruelty witty. I looked at the congealed soup in my daughter's hand. Then I looked at the notification on my phone from my private banking app. It showed the transaction from 3 days ago, where I had wired $5,000 to my mother's account to cover this entire dinner. I had bought the turkey. I had bought the wine. I had bought the chair Chanel was sitting on. I took a deep breath and knelt down to Maya's eye level. "Do not eat that soup, baby," I said softly. "Save your appetite, because in about 10 minutes, nobody in that room is going to be hungry anymore." From my vantage point in the shadows of the pantry, I watched the scene unfold in the dining room like a slow-motion car crash. Mr. Sterling had stood up to give a toast. He held his crystal wineglass high, the amber liquid catching the light of the chandelier. He was speaking about the importance of legacy and integrity values that my family pretended to have, but had never actually practiced. My parents were gazing up at him with rapt adoration, and Hunter looked like he was about to burst with pride. It was the perfect tableau of a successful American family. And then it shattered. My daughter Maya was shivering. The draft from the back door was relentless, and her small hands were shaking as she tried to lift the heavy ceramic bowl of cold soup to her lips. Her fingers slipped. The heavy silver spoon fell from her grip and hit the tiled floor with a clang that sounded like a gunshot in the respectful silence. It bounced once, twice, and then spun noisily before coming to a rest. Mr. Sterling stopped speaking mid-sentence. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Hunter slammed his fist onto the mahogany table, causing the fine china to rattle. "For God's sake," he roared, his face turning a violent shade of red. "Can't you keep that child under control for 5 minutes?" Maya flinched, dropping the bowl entirely. It smashed, sending cold pumpkin soup splattering across the floor and onto her socks. She burst into tears, her small body heaving with sobs. I immediately dropped to my knees, pulling her into my arms to shield her. "I am sorry," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "She is cold, Hunter. Her hands are numb." "I do not care if she is freezing to death," Hunter screamed, standing up and throwing his napkin onto his plate. "This is exactly what I was talking about. You bring this feral behavior into my house, and you ruin the most important moment of my career. Mr. Sterling was speaking. Do you have no respect? Do you have no shame?" I looked up, expecting my father to intervene. Surely this was the line. Surely watching his 8-year-old granddaughter being screamed at for an accident would wake up his paternal instinct. I looked at Desmond, the man who had raised me, hoping to see a flash of anger directed at Hunter. Desmond stood up slowly, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked at Hunter, who was fuming. Then he looked at Mr. Sterling, who was watching the scene with an unreadable expression. Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were colder than the snow outside. "You are an embarrassment, Jada," my father said, his voice low and venomous. "Hunter is right. We try to elevate this family. We try to surround ourselves with excellence, and you just drag us back down into the gutter. Look at this mess. Look at this noise." "Dad, she is just a child," I pleaded, tightening my grip on Maya. "She is a reflection of you," Desmond cut me off. "Undisciplined, unwelcome, and frankly, I am tired of apologizing for you. You have ruined my perfect Thanksgiving dinner. I wanted one night of sophistication, and you turned it into a circus." He pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. Not the back door, but the main entrance, as if he wanted to make sure our exit was public and humiliating. "Get out," he spat. "Take your brat and get out of my house. I do not want to see your face until you learn how to behave in civilized society." Chanel let out a cruel little laugh. "Bye-bye, Jada," she sang out. "Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Actually, Do let it hit you. Maybe it will knock some sense into you. I stood up, lifting Maya into my arms. The soup was soaking into my jeans, but I didn't care. I looked at Mr. Sterling one last time. He wasn't looking at my father or Hunter. He was looking at me, and for a second, he gave me a barely perceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of dismissal. It was a nod of understanding. I turned my back on the table, leaving the warmth, the food, and the people who shared my bloodline. As I walked toward the door, I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't my heart breaking. It was the final tether of loyalty severing forever. They wanted me to leave. Fine. But they had no idea that by kicking me out, they were evicting themselves from the only safety net they had left. The walk from the dining room to the front door felt like the longest journey of my life. Hunter gripped my upper arm, his fingers digging into my flesh through my sweater, not with the touch of a relative, but with the aggressive force of a bouncer throwing a drunk out of a club. My father, Desmond, stood by the fireplace watching us leave with his arms crossed, his face set in a mask of stony indifference. He did not look at his granddaughter, who was sobbing into my shoulder. He only looked at the door, silently willing us to disappear so he could return to his perfect fantasy life. Hunter shoved the heavy oak door open, and the winter wind rushed in instantly, biting and violent. It swirled around the foyer, threatening to extinguish the expensive scented candles my mother loved so much. Out Hunter barked, pointing into the darkness. Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of, Jada, and do not think about coming back for Christmas, or Easter, or ever. I stepped out onto the porch, the stone freezing beneath my socks. I turned back, realizing our coats were still inside on the rack. Hunter, please, I said, my voice low and urgent. Our coats. It is 5 degrees out here. Just let me grab our jackets and Maya's boots. Hunter looked at the coat rack, where my worn-down parka hung next to his cashmere overcoat. He laughed, a short, cruel sound. He grabbed my coat and Maya's small pink puffer jacket, but instead of handing them to me, he balled them up and threw them as hard as he could over my head. They landed with a soft thud in a snowbank 3 feet away from the porch steps. Fetch, he said, sneering. I stared at him, unable to comprehend how a human being could be this malicious. Maya shivered violently in my arms, her teeth chattering. Hunter placed his hand on the door handle, ready to seal us out. He leaned in close, his face twisted with disgust. Listen to me carefully, Jada, he hissed. You are a stain on this family's reputation. You always have been. We tolerate you because of Mom and Dad, but tonight, you crossed the line. You embarrassed me in front of Sterling, so hear this and hear it well. You are no longer family. You are a stranger. If you come back here, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. You are no longer family. The words hung in the freezing air, vibrating with finality. He slammed the door shut. The heavy sound of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed like a gunshot. Click, lock, gone. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind howling through the trees. And then, faintly through the thick wood of the door, I heard it. Laughter. High-pitched and mocking. Chanel was laughing. They were already moving on. They were probably pouring more wine, making jokes about the trash taking itself out. Mommy Maya cried, her face buried in my neck. Why does Grandpa hate us? Did I do something bad? I carried her down the steps, my socks instantly soaking through in the snow. I retrieved our coats from the snowbank, shaking off the ice, before wrapping Maya in her pink jacket. I put her down for just a second to pull on my own coat. The cold was searing, but strangely, I didn't feel it anymore. Inside my chest, the heartbreak was rapidly hardening into something else. Something cold, something sharp, something like steel. I knelt down and wiped the tears from Maya's face. "You did nothing wrong, baby," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Grandpa doesn't hate us. Grandpa just made a very big mistake. He forgot who actually owns the roof over his head." I stood up and brushed the snow off my jeans. I looked back at the house. The windows were glowing with warm golden light. It looked so cozy, so inviting. It was a lie. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were not shaking anymore. I unlocked the screen and dialed a number I had saved for emergencies only. It rang once. "Rick," I said into the receiver. "Jada?" My lawyer's voice sounded surprised. "It is Thanksgiving. Is everything all right?" "No, Rick," I said, staring at the closed door. "I need you to work tonight. Do you remember the eviction protocol we drafted for the Greenwich property?" "Protocol Omega?" There was a pause on the other end. "Protocol Omega? Jada, that is the nuclear option. That authorizes immediate foreclosure and seizure of assets. Are you sure? That is your parents' house." "Not anymore," I replied, watching a shadow move past the window. "Activate it, Rick. I want the notice served by 6 a.m. tomorrow. I want the locks changed. I want the assets frozen. Take it all back." "But Jada," Rick stammered, "it is a holiday." I turned around and walked toward my car, holding my daughter's hand. "Exactly," I said. "And the holiday is over. Execute the order." The walk back to my Honda Civic felt miles long. The snow was falling harder now, covering our footprints almost as soon as we made them. Behind us, the heavy oak door of my parents' house remained shut, barring us from the warmth and the smell of roasting turkey. I could still hear the faint sound of laughter drifting from the dining room, where my family was undoubtedly toasting to their relief at finally getting rid of me. They thought they had discarded a piece of trash. They had no idea they had just thrown away a diamond. I opened the rear door of the car and helped Maya climb inside. Her small body was trembling and her teeth chattered violently. "Mommy," she stammered, her voice thick with tears. "It is so cold. Why is the car so old? The heater takes forever to work." I looked at her, and for the first time that night, a genuine smile touched my lips. "Not anymore, baby," I whispered. "Watch this." I slid into the driver's seat and closed the door. The moment the latch clicked, the howling wind and the biting cold vanished instantly. To the outside world, my car looked like a rusted 10-year-old sedan with a dented bumper and fading paint. It was the perfect camouflage for a woman worth $300 million who wanted to move through the world unseen. But inside, it was a fortress. I pressed my thumb against a hidden biometric scanner on the dashboard. The dull gray plastic panel slid away, revealing a glowing high-definition interface. The interior lights hummed to life, casting a soft, luxurious blue glow over the cabin. The seats, which looked like worn fabric, were actually covers hiding hand-stitched Italian leather that heated up instantly, wrapping us in warmth. The engine didn't sputter and cough like a dying animal. It purred with the silent, dangerous power of a custom-built engine designed for speed and security. Maya stopped crying. She looked around wide-eyed as the car transformed around her. "Mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "What is happening? The car feels magic." "It is not magic, Maya," I said, buckling my seatbelt. "It is prepared, just like we are going to be." I tapped the console and the satellite communication system connected instantly, bypassing the local cell towers. A calm male voice filled the cabin. "Good evening, Madam Jada. We detected a rise in your heart rate. Is everything secure?" "Everything is fine, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping, the trembling act I had put on for my family. My tone was now steel and ice, the voice of the CEO of Onyx Logistics. "Change of plans. Cancel the reservation at the motel. I want the presidential penthouse at the St. Regis prepped and ready in 20 minutes. Have the chef prepare a full Thanksgiving dinner with lobster and truffle mac and cheese. And Marcus, send the security detail to the perimeter of the estate. I want eyes on them." "Understood, madam," the voice replied. "The penthouse is being prepped now." I put the car in gear. The vehicle glided over the snow with effortless grace, the specialized tires gripping the ice that Hunter's BMW would have spun out on. As we pulled away from the house, leaving the darkness of the driveway behind, Maya leaned forward from the back seat. She looked at the expensive display screen, then back at the house, disappearing in the rearview mirror. "Mommy," she asked quietly, "Grandma and Grandpa kicked us out. Does that mean we don't have a home anymore? Are we homeless?" I looked at my daughter in the mirror. Her face was illuminated by the lights of the dashboard, reflecting the power we truly held. I reached back and squeezed her hand. "No, baby," I said firmly, pressing down on the accelerator. "We are not homeless. Look out the window at the city lights. By tomorrow morning, that entire skyline is going to be our playground. Tonight we feast. Tomorrow we take over." We pulled into the drive-thru of a 24-hour fried chicken joint on the outskirts of Greenwich. It was not the truffle mac and cheese I had promised her at the hotel yet, but Maya was starving. The smell of grease and salty fries filled the luxury cabin of the car, replacing the memory of the roast turkey we were denied. Maya sat in the passenger seat, holding a drumstick in one hand and a biscuit in the other. She looked small and vulnerable, but she was smiling, trying to be brave for me. I looked at her, and then I looked at the blue folder lying on the dashboard. It was the foreclosure file I had brought with me to give to my father, privately, before things went wrong. Now it was a weapon. I reached over and adjusted the folder. I did not hide it. I moved it specifically so the bold black letters on the cover were catching the light from the street lamp outside. It read, "Onyx Logistics, Confidential." Below that, in red ink, were the words, "Property owner Jada," followed by the full address of my parents' estate. "Hold on, baby," I said, pulling out my phone. "Smile for Mommy." Maya smiled, a little grease on her chin, holding up her fried chicken. I snapped the photo. It looked like a sad, humble picture of a mother and daughter eating fast food on a holiday. But to anyone who looked closely, it was a declaration of war. I opened Twitter first. I uploaded the photo. I did not tag my family. I did not use their names. I simply wrote, "When your family kicks you and your 8-year-old out into the snow because you are poor, you make your own feast. Grateful for the truth. Landlord inspection starts at 6 a.m. tomorrow." Then I posted the same picture to LinkedIn, where I had a following of over 200,000 professionals who knew me only as the mysterious and ruthless CEO of Onyx. I hit post. I took a bite of a biscuit and watched the screen. It took exactly 3 minutes for the first comment to appear. "Wait, is that the Onyx Logistics logo?" Then another. "Zoom in on the folder. That is the deed to the house in Greenwich." Then the floodgates opened. My phone began to vibrate so hard it made my hand numb. The notifications were rolling in like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. 500 likes, 1,000 likes, 5,000 likes in 10 minutes. The internet sleuths were at work. Someone in the comments found the public records for the address on the folder. "Oh my God," a user named Justice for Jada wrote. "I know that house. That is where Hunter, the VP of sales, lives. Did he just kick his own boss out of her own house?" Another comment from a business insider read, "I recognize that interior. That is a custom armored Honda. Jada is not poor. She is testing them, and they failed." By the time we finished our chicken, the post had 10,000 likes and 3,000 shares. The hashtag #ToxicFamily was trending. People were already finding Hunter's company page and leaving 1-star reviews. They were finding my sister's fake interior design page and calling out her knockoff bags. I looked at the screen, watching the digital mob assemble with torches and pitchforks. My family wanted to be famous. They wanted to be seen as the elite. Well, I had just given them their wish. They were famous now, but not for the reasons they wanted. I saw a new notification pop up at the top of the screen. It was a tag from a local news reporter. "If this is true, this is the story of the year." I turned off the screen and looked at Maya. "Finished eating, baby?" I asked. She nodded, wiping her mouth. "Good," I said, putting the car back in gear. "Let's go to the hotel. The show is just getting started, and I want to be watching from a comfortable chair when the bomb finally goes off." Back inside the warmth of the dining room, the atmosphere was jubilant. It was as if a dark cloud had been lifted the moment the front door clicked shut behind me and Maya. My mother, Shirley, was practically glowing as she poured a heavy stream of vintage Cabernet into Mr. Sterling's crystal glass. She laughed a little too loudly at a joke that wasn't funny, desperate to smooth over the awkward scene that had just occurred. "I am so sorry about that interruption, Mr. Sterling," my father Desmond said, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. "Every family has that one member who just refuses to get their act together. We tried to help Jada, but some people are simply beyond saving." Hunter was standing at the head of the table, carving the turkey with grand theatrical gestures. He felt like the king of the castle. "Absolutely," he chimed in, placing a slice of white meat onto Mr. Sterling's plate. "We believe in tough love in this house. Enabling her laziness would only hurt her in the long run. Now let us forget about the rabble and focus on the future. To the new partnership, sir." Hunter raised his glass, expecting a toast. Mr. Sterling raised his glass slowly, but his eyes were distant. He took a polite sip, but he did not smile. He was a businessman, and his instincts were telling him something was wrong. The air in the room felt charged with a static electricity that my family was too arrogant to feel. Suddenly, a vibration buzzed against the polished wood of the table. It was Mr. Sterling's phone. Then it buzzed again, and again. A rapid-fire succession of notifications that usually indicated a crisis. Mr. Sterling frowned, setting his wineglass down. "My apologies," he muttered, reaching for the device. "I have my alert set for breaking industry news." Hunter waved his hand magnanimously. "Business never sleeps, sir. I admire that about you." Mr. Sterling unlocked his phone. The polite expression on his face vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer confusion, followed rapidly by dawning horror. He was looking at LinkedIn. His feed, which was usually filled with stock updates and corporate announcements, was dominated by a single viral post. A photo of a little girl eating fried chicken in a luxury car with a confidential folder clearly visible on the dashboard. Mr. Sterling stopped breathing for a second. He tapped the screen, zooming in on the image. He recognized the folder. He recognized the red stamp. And then he looked at the name printed on the document. Jada. He looked up from the phone, his eyes darting to the empty seat where I had almost sat. Then he looked at Hunter, who was still smiling like a fool. The color drained from Mr. Sterling's face, leaving him pale and ghostly. His hand started to shake. "Is something wrong, sir?" Hunter asked, sensing the shift in mood. "Is it the stock market?" Mr. Sterling did not answer. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound made everyone jump. He did not look at my parents. He stared at Hunter with the kind of look one gives to a man who has just pulled the pin on a grenade and dropped it at his own feet. "Hunter, Mr. Sterling," said his voice barely a whisper. "The woman. The one you just threw out into the snow. What was her name again?" Hunter rolled his eyes, chuckling nervously. "Jada. Why do you ask?" "She is just a nuisance, sir. Don't let her worry you." Mr. Sterling turned his phone around and shoved it into Hunter's face. The screen was bright in the dim room. "Look at this photo, Hunter. Look at the folder on the dashboard. Do you see what it says?" Hunter squinted. "Onyx Logistics? Confidential? So what? She probably stole a folder from some office she cleans at." "You idiot!" Mr. Sterling roared, slamming his hand on the table. "She didn't steal it. She is the signatory. I have been trying to get a meeting with the CEO of Onyx for 6 months, and nobody knew who it was. It was a ghost. But it is her." The room went dead silent. Mr. Sterling leaned across the table, his eyes wide with terror. "That wasn't the help hunter. That was the chairman of the board. You just kicked Jada Washington, the most powerful woman in logistics, out of her own house. Do you have any idea what you have just done to us?" The silence in the dining room was broken by the sound of a chair scraping violently against the floor. Mr. Sterling stood up so fast he almost knocked over his wine glass. He looked at Hunter with a mixture of horror and disgust, as if he had just realized he was sharing a meal with a contagion. He did not say a word to my parents. He simply turned around and walked briskly toward the hallway, grabbing his coat from the rack with trembling hands. Hunter scrambled after him, his face pale with panic. "Mr. Sterling, wait, please. There must be some misunderstanding. That woman is just a disgruntled relative. She is lying. She probably photoshopped that image. You cannot believe a social media post over your own director of sales." Mr. Sterling spun around at the door, his eyes blazing. "You are not my director of sales anymore, Hunter. You are a liability. Do you think a woman like Jada Washington would fake a federal foreclosure document? Do you think the CEO of Onyx Logistics plays games? I have been trying to secure a contract with her for months to save our quarterly earnings, and you just threw her out in the snow like a stray dog?" "But sir," Hunter stammered, reaching out to grab Mr. Sterling's sleeve. "Do not touch me," Mr. Sterling hissed, pulling his arm away. "I am leaving, and if you have any brain cells left in that arrogant head of yours, you will start packing. Because if Jada is who I think she is, you won't just lose your job. You are going to lose everything." The heavy door slammed shut, leaving Hunter standing alone in the foyer. He stared at the wood for a moment, before turning back to the dining room. His fear instantly morphed into blind rage. He marched back to the table where my parents were sitting in stunned silence. "She did this," Hunter screamed, kicking a chair over. "That witch. She set me up. She must have slept with someone at the bank to get those papers. Or she hacked the system. There is no way Jada owns this house. She drives a Honda, for God's sake. My mother poured herself another glass of wine, her hands shaking. Hunter, what if it is true? What if she really is rich? Then she is dead to me, Hunter spat, pacing around the room. She watched us struggle. She watched me pay bills, and she sat on a pile of money laughing at us. She is not family. She is a monster, and I am going to destroy her. While my family was imploding in Greenwich, I was stepping into a world of quiet luxury 10 miles away. The presidential suite at the St. Regis was warm and smelled of fresh lilies and expensive linen. Maya ran into the room, her eyes wide as she took in the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. She jumped onto the massive king-sized bed, sinking into the duvet with a giggle that melted the last of the anger in my chest. "Mommy, look," Maya cried. "It is like a castle." "It is better than a castle, baby," I said, taking off my coat. "It is ours for as long as we want." A knock at the door signaled the arrival of room service. A waiter rolled in a cart covered in silver domes. He lifted the lids, revealing steaming lobster mac and cheese, roasted vegetables, and a decadent chocolate soufflé. It was the feast I had promised her. We sat on the floor in our pajamas, eating lobster and watching cartoons on the massive television. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. I wasn't the black sheep. I wasn't the scapegoat. I was just a mother, protecting her child. Meanwhile, back at the house, the atmosphere was toxic. My sophisticated spy software on Hunter's phone, which was company property and therefore legally monitored by me, recorded every word. They were not eating. The turkey sat cold and untouched in the center of the table. "We need to call a lawyer," my father, Desmond, said, his voice weak. "If she really owns the house, she can evict us." "She wouldn't dare," my mother scoffed, although she didn't sound convinced. "I am her mother. She craves my approval. She is just throwing a tantrum. She will be back tomorrow, begging for forgiveness." Hunter was in the corner drinking whiskey straight from the bottle. He pulled out his credit card to order a car service for the morning, intending to go to my office and confront me. He opened his banking app. Suddenly, he threw the glass against the wall. "What is it?" Chanel shrieked, jumping up. "My cards!" Hunter roared. "They are declined. All of them. The company card, my personal card, even the joint account. They are all frozen." I lay in the soft hotel bed, watching the snow fall outside. I picked up my phone and opened the admin panel for the family trust. With a single tap, I had initiated the freeze. I turned off the phone, pulled the duvet up to my chin, and fell into the deepest sleep of my life. The sun rose on Black Friday, casting a harsh gray light over the snow-covered estate. Usually this was the day my mother and sister would wake up early to go shopping, spending money they didn't earn on things they didn't need. But this morning, the house was silent and heavy with dread. At exactly 6 a.m, 3 black SUVs rolled silently up the long driveway. They did not look like holiday visitors. They looked like a paramilitary operation. The lead vehicle was a sleek, armored Cadillac Escalade. Behind it was a local police cruiser, and behind that was a moving truck. Inside the house, Hunter was passed out on the sofa, still wearing his suit from the night before. The sound of a heavy, authoritative pounding on the front door jolted him awake. He groaned, holding his throbbing head. "Who is it?" he yelled, his voice hoarse. "Go away!" The pounding continued, harder this time. "Open the door, Mr. Brooks. This is the sheriff's department." Hunter stumbled to the door, pulling it open. The cold morning air hit him like a slap in the face. Standing on the porch was not just the sheriff, but a man in a sharp navy blue suit holding a briefcase. It was Rick, my personal attorney and the most feared litigator in the state. "Hunter Brooks?" Rick asked, his voice calm and professional. "Yeah, what do you want?" Hunter snarled, trying to block the doorway. Rick didn't flinch. He handed Hunter a thick envelope. "My name is Richard Sterling, no relation to your former boss. I represent the Jada Washington Trust and Onyx Logistics. You are being served with an immediate order of eviction and repossession of property." My parents appeared behind Hunter, wearing their bathrobes, looking terrified and disheveled. "What is going on?" my mother asked, clutching her chest. Rick looked past Hunter, addressing my parents directly. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington, you are in violation of your lease agreement, which states that any act of verbal abuse or defamation against the property owner results in immediate termination. Since you publicly disowned the owner last night, you have 60 minutes to vacate the premises." "This is insane," Hunter shouted, stepping forward. "You cannot do this. It is a holiday weekend. We have rights. Squatters' rights." Rick signaled to the sheriff. "Actually, you have no rights. This is corporate housing and you are trespassing. You have 59 minutes left before the sheriff escorts you out in handcuffs. I suggest you start packing." The moving crew stepped out of the truck, holding empty cardboard boxes. They marched past a stunned Hunter and began entering the house. My mother screamed. Hunter fell to his knees, and miles away, in a warm hotel bed, I woke up, smiled, and ordered breakfast. While the snowstorm raged outside, burying the city in white silence, the presidential suite at the St. Regis was an oasis of warmth and peace. Maya was wearing a plush white robe that was 3 sizes too big for her, giggling as she jumped on the massive king-sized bed. The room service cart had arrived, rolling in like a chariot of gold. It was not laden with cold soup and leftovers. It held plates of A5 Wagyu beef seared to perfection, truffle mashed potatoes, and a tower of chocolate fondue. "Mommy, this meat tastes like butter," Maya said, her eyes wide with delight. I smiled, sipping a glass of sparkling water. "It is the best beef in the world, baby, and you deserve the best." I sat back in the velvet armchair, allowing the hotel's masseuse to work the tension out of my feet. Every knot that Hunter and my parents had tied in my soul over the last 5 years was being kneaded away. The silence of the room was not empty. It was luxurious. It was the sound of safety. In stark contrast, 10 miles away, the dining room at my parents' estate looked like a crime scene of emotional violence. The expensive turkey sat in the center of the mahogany table, cold and uncut, looking like a mock monument to their failure. Nobody was eating. The air was thick with accusations and panic. Hunter was pacing back and forth, his heavy footsteps thudding against the floor. He had loosened his tie and his face was a mask of red fury. "You told me she was broke," he screamed, pointing a finger at Chanel, who was sobbing into her napkin. "You told me she was a loser who wrote blog posts for pennies. How does a loser get Mr. Sterling to run out of here like he saw a ghost?" "I didn't know," Chanel wailed, her mascara running down her cheeks. "She drives a 10-year-old Honda, Hunter. She wears clothes from Walmart. How was I supposed to know she was the CEO of Onyx?" My father Desmond sat with his head in his hands. "I tried to call Sterling 5 times, he muttered. He sent me to voicemail. "Do you know what this means? If Onyx pulls the supply chain contract, Hunter's company goes under. And if Hunter goes under, who pays the mortgage on this house?" My mother, Shirley, was trying to play the peacemaker, but her hands were shaking as she poured herself another glass of wine. "Stop it, everyone," she pleaded. "We are overreacting. Jada is still my daughter. She is probably just dating someone rich. She doesn't have the brains to run a logistics empire. I will call her in the morning. I will remind her who raised her. She will calm down and fix this." Back in the hotel suite, I dipped a strawberry into the warm chocolate and handed it to Maya. I picked up my phone. I didn't call them. I opened my banking app. I scrolled to the family sub-account, the one I had secretly funded for years to keep a roof over their heads while letting my father take the credit. I tapped the button that said Freeze Assets. At the estate, my mother's phone buzzed loudly against the silent table. She picked it up, wiping her eyes. "Is it Jada?" my father asked, hope rising in his voice. My mother stared at the screen. Her face went gray. The glass of wine slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, staining the Persian rug blood red. "What is it?" Hunter demanded. My mother read the text message out loud, her voice trembling with terror. "Alert from Chase Bank. Secondary account access has been suspended by the primary account holder, Jada Washington. Reason given: violation of conduct. Current balance available, $0. The room went deadly quiet. The heat in the house seemed to vanish instantly, replaced by the bone-chilling realization that the gravy train had not just stopped. It had derailed, and they were all trapped in the wreckage. Black Friday is usually a day of chaos at the mall for my mother and Chanel. They would normally be up before dawn fighting over discounted handbags and maxing out credit cards to maintain the illusion of their wealth. But this Friday, the chaos came to them. The sun had barely crested over the snowy horizon when the silence of the exclusive Greenwich neighborhood was shattered, not by holiday shoppers, but by the low rumble of heavy engines. From my hotel balcony miles away, I sipped my coffee and checked the GPS trackers on the security fleet. They had arrived. A convoy of 3 matte black SUVs turned onto the driveway, moving with synchronized predatory precision. The lead vehicle was an armored Cadillac Escalade, followed closely by a sheriff's cruiser and a large, unmarked moving truck. They did not look like guests coming for leftover turkey. They looked like a government raid. Inside the house, Hunter was nursing a splitting hangover on the living room sofa. The events of the night before, the frozen accounts, the humiliation by Mr. Sterling, still felt like a bad dream he could wake up from. When he heard the tires crunching on the gravel, he stumbled to the window, pulling back the curtain. Hope flared in his chest for a second. Maybe it was Mr. Sterling coming back to apologize. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. He yanked the front door open just as a heavy fist was raised to knock again. The cold morning air rushed in, carrying the scent of diesel and impending doom. Standing on the welcome mat was not a friend. It was a man in a razor-sharp navy suit, holding a leather briefcase. Behind him stood 2 uniformed deputies with their arms crossed, their breath misting in the freezing air. Hunter blinked his eyes bleary and bloodshot. "Who are you?" he barked, trying to muster some of his usual arrogance. "If you are selling something, get off my property." The man in the suit didn't blink. He didn't smile. He simply adjusted his glasses and looked at Hunter with the detached pity of a coroner looking at a corpse. "My name is Richard Sterling," the man said, his voice crisp and clear, cutting through the morning air. "I am the lead counsel for the Jada Washington Trust in Onyx Logistics." My mother and father appeared behind Hunter, clutching their bathrobes, their faces gray with fear. My mother saw the police car and let out a small gasp. "What is happening?" she whispered, clutching her chest. "Is Jada okay? Did something happen to the car?" The lawyer ignored her question. He pulled a thick stack of papers from his briefcase and shoved them into Hunter's chest, forcing him to grab them or let them fall in the snow. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington, Mr. Brooks," he began, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are currently in violation of your lease agreement, specifically Section 4, regarding the defamation and verbal abuse of the property owner. Since you made it very clear last night that my client is no longer family, she has decided to exercise her right to terminate your residency, effective immediately." Hunter stared at the papers, his hands shaking. "This is a joke," he stammered. "You can't just kick us out. We have rights." "Actually, you have none," the lawyer replied, checking his expensive watch. "This is corporate housing, provided at the discretion of the owner. That discretion has been revoked. The sheriff is here to ensure the peace is kept and that you do not damage any of my client's assets on your way out." He looked up, his eyes cold and hard. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You have exactly 60 minutes to remove your personal effects and vacate the premises. Anything left inside after that hour becomes the property of Onyx Logistics. The clock starts now." My father Desmond finally found his voice. He pushed past a stunned Hunter clutching a leather folder to his chest like a shield. His face was flushed red, not from the biting cold wind, but from a mixture of indignation and panic. He looked at the lawyer with the kind of arrogance only a man who has lived a lie for too long can possess. "You are a fraud," my father shouted, waving the folder in the air. "Get off my property. I have the deed right here. I bought this house in 1990. My name is on the title. Desmond Washington. Look at it." He fumbled with the papers, his hands trembling violently in the freezing air, until he pulled out a yellowed document. He thrust it toward Rick's face triumphantly. "See? This is my house. You and that ungrateful daughter of mine are trying to pull a scam. I will have you disbarred for this." Rick looked at the paper. Then he looked at my father. A small, dry smile played on his lips. It was not a smile of amusement, but of pity. "Mr. Washington," Rick said, his voice calm and level. "That is indeed a deed from 30 years ago. However, you seem to have forgotten what happened 5 years ago. Or perhaps you just hoped everyone else had forgotten too." Rick opened his briefcase and pulled out a crisp, fresh document stamped with the official seal of the county clerk. "Let me refresh your memory," Rick continued, stepping closer so my mother and Hunter could hear every word. 5 years ago, you were facing total bankruptcy due to significant and secret losses at the MGM Grand Casino. You owed the bank $3 million. They were 24 hours away from seizing this estate and putting you on the street. My mother gasped, turning to look at my father. "Desmond, what is he talking about? You told me the business had a bad quarter. You never said anything about gambling." My father went pale. He tried to speak, but no words came out. Rick ignored the family drama and pressed on. "That is when a private equity firm called Jada Holdings stepped in. They paid off your entire debt in cash. They saved your reputation, and they allowed you to continue living here so you could save face in the community." Rick held up the document. "Jada Holdings stands for Jada Darnell Holdings. Your daughter bought your debt. She owns the roof over your head. She owns the ground you are standing on, and for 5 years she has leased it back to you for the sum of $1 per year." $1? Hunter whispered, his eyes widening. "Yes," Rick said. "Charity. She wanted her parents to have dignity, even though you offered her none. But there was one condition in this lease agreement." Rick pulled out a single sheet of paper from the back of the file. It was the lease agreement signed by my father's own shaky hand 5 years prior. Clause 4B, Rick read aloud. The tenant agrees to treat the property owner and her agents with civil respect. Any act of verbal abuse, public defamation, or exclusion from the family unit will result in the immediate nullification of this lease. My father stared at his signature on the page. He looked defeated. He looked old. But Rick wasn't finished. He held the contract up in the morning light so they could all see it clearly. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he ripped the paper in half. Then, in half again. The sound of the tearing paper echoed in the silent driveway like bones breaking. This contract is now void, Rick declared, tossing the confetti of paper into the snow at my father's feet. The $1 rent is over. The charity is over. You are now trespassing on private property. The clock is ticking, Mr. Washington. You have 45 minutes left. Hunter did not back down. Instead, he let out a short, incredulous laugh that puffed out in the frozen air like smoke. He was a man who had spent his entire life bullying people he perceived as weaker than him, and he was not about to stop now just because a lawyer in a nice suit tore up a piece of paper. He took a menacing step toward Rick, his hands balled into fists. The veins in his neck were bulging, and his face was a mask of pure, unadulterated aggression. You think you can come onto my driveway and threaten my family? Hunter shouted, spitting the words out. You think tearing up a contract means anything? I know the law, pal. I know my rights. And I know people in this town. I play golf with the chief of police. He lunged forward, grabbing the lapel of Rick's expensive wool coat. Get off my property now, or I will make you regret the day you were born. I will have your license revoked. I will have you arrested for harassment. Rick did not flinch. He did not even raise his hands to defend himself. He simply looked down at Hunter's hand gripping his coat, and then looked over Hunter's shoulder toward the sheriff's cruiser parked behind the moving truck. Sheriff Millerick said calmly, I believe this constitutes assault on an officer of the court. The sheriff, who had been leaning against his car with his arms crossed, straightened up immediately. He was a large man with a stern face, and he had watched the entire exchange with a look of disappointment. He walked forward, his heavy boots crunching loudly on the snow. Hunter smiled, thinking his golf buddy was coming to save him. Sheriff, arrest this man, Hunter demanded, pointing at Rick. He is trespassing. He is harassing my wife and her parents. Get him out of here. Sheriff Miller stopped 2 feet away from Hunter. He placed a hand on his belt near his handcuffs. Mr. Brooks, take your hands off Mr. Sterling immediately. Hunter blinked, confused. What? Did you hear me, Sheriff? He is the one trespassing. I said, take your hands off him! Sheriff Miller repeated, his voice dropping an octave. You are the one trespassing, Mr. Brooks, and now you are adding assault and disorderly conduct to the list. I suggest you step back before I make this a very unpleasant morning for you. Hunter let go of Rick as if he had been burned. But Sheriff, I donate to the policeman's ball every year. You know me. Sheriff Miller shook his head. Actually, sir, the biggest donor to the department is the Onyx Logistics Community Outreach Program. That would be Miss Jada Washington. She bought us our new fleet of cruisers last month. You are currently assaulting her legal representative. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. Hunter's mouth fell open. But before he could protest, the sheriff spun him around. The cold metallic click of handcuffs fastening around Hunter's wrists echoed through the silent neighborhood. My father, Desmond, gasped. Chanel screamed, running down the porch steps, but stopped when the sheriff shot her a warning look. My mother, Shirley, watched in absolute horror as her son-in-law, the golden boy, was shoved against the hood of the police car. The illusion of their perfect life was shattering right before her eyes. Panic seized her chest. She realized there was only one person who could stop this madness. "Jada," she whispered. "Jada will fix this. She always fixes everything." My mother fumbled in the pocket of her bathrobe, pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. She dialed Jada's number. She pressed the phone to her ear, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs. She expected to hear Jada's calm voice. She was ready to cry, ready to guilt trip, ready to demand that Jada call off her dogs. The phone rang once. Then the line clicked. My mother opened her mouth to speak. "Jada, please, you have to stop this." But it wasn't Jada. It was a cold, robotic operator voice. "The number you are trying to reach has permanently blocked your number. Please do not try to call again. Goodbye." The line went dead. My mother stared at the phone as the silence of the winter morning swallowed her whole. She realized with a terrifying clarity that she wasn't just evicted from a house. She had been evicted from her daughter's life. The 60-minute countdown began immediately, and it was the longest hour in the history of the Greenwich estate. The commotion caused by the police sirens and Hunter's arrest had woken up the entire neighborhood. In a community like this, privacy was the ultimate currency, and losing it was the ultimate bankruptcy. Curtains were twitching in every window across the street. People were stepping out onto their porches wrapped in expensive wool robes, holding steaming mugs of coffee, to watch the downfall of the family that had always looked down on them. Chanel was in full panic mode. The moving crew provided by Onyx Logistics stood by the door with their arms crossed. They were under strict orders not to help pack. Their job was only to ensure that my family did not steal or damage any property that belonged to the trust. That meant my sister, who had never lifted anything heavier than a platinum credit card, was forced to do manual labor. She ran out of the house dragging a heavy cardboard box filled with her shoes. She was wearing her pajamas and a pair of high heels she had refused to take off. The driveway was slick with ice and snow. "Move it, Chanel!" my father Desmond yelled from the porch, his voice cracking with stress. "We only have 20 minutes left." "I am trying, Daddy," she shrieked back, tears streaming down her face. She hurried down the steps, clutching her prized orange Hermes Birkin bag under her arm. This was the bag she had flaunted at every country club lunch. The bag she claimed cost $12,000 and had a 2-year waiting list. But as she stepped onto the icy pavement, her heel caught a patch of black ice. Chanel screamed as her legs went out from under her. She crashed hard onto the asphalt, sending the cardboard box flying. The impact caused her precious orange bag to snag on a sharp piece of ice. The leather, which should have been durable French calfskin, tore open like wet paper. The bag split down the middle, spilling her makeup and phone into the slush. And there it was for the world to see. The lining of the bag wasn't soft leather. It was cheap cardboard stiffener. A white tag fluttered out in the wind and landed right near the boot of a neighbor who had walked over to watch. The neighbor, a teenager named Kyle, who was live streaming the event on TikTok, zoomed in on the tag. "Made in China," he read out loud, laughing. 100% polyurethane. Chanel scrambled in the snow trying to hide the bag, but it was too late. The comments on the live stream were flying. Fake bag, fake life, fake people. Hunter watched helplessly from the back of the sheriff's cruiser, his face pressed against the glass. He saw his wife humiliated in the snow. He saw the neighbors pointing and whispering. Mrs. Higgins, the president of the Homeowners Association, stood by her hedges shaking her head. Her voice carried clearly in the cold air, cutting through my mother's heart like a knife. "I always suspected they were living above their means," Mrs. Higgins whispered to her husband, "but I never guessed it was this bad. Can you believe it? They weren't rich at all. They were just squatting there. The whole time they were living off the charity of that nice daughter, Jada. You know, the one they always made sit in the kitchen? Turns out she owns the whole block." My mother lowered her head, wishing the snow would just swallow her whole. The secret was out. They weren't the elite. They were the eviction case of the year. The countdown was now at 30 minutes, and the interior of the house had descended into absolute chaos. My mother Shirley ran into the living room, her face flushed with exertion. She pointed a shaking finger at the massive velvet Chesterfield sofa that anchored the room. This was her pride and joy, the piece of furniture she sat on while judging everyone else. "You too!" she screamed at the moving crew provided by Onyx Logistics. "Grab this sofa! It is Italian leather, custom made. Do not scratch it or I will sue you for every penny you have." The two large movers looked at her. Then they looked at Rick the lawyer, who was standing in the doorway holding a tablet. Rick did not look up from the screen. He simply raised one hand and said 2 words. "Leave it." My mother spun around, her eyes bulging. "Excuse me? That is my sofa. I picked out the fabric myself. You cannot keep my furniture. That is theft." Rick walked into the room, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. He tapped the screen of his tablet and turned it around so she could see. It was a digital receipt dated 3 years ago. "Actually, Mrs. Washington," Rick said, his voice devoid of emotion, "you selected the fabric, yes, but you did not pay for it. This item was purchased with an American Express card ending in 4099. That card belongs to Jada Washington. Therefore, this sofa belongs to the trust. It stays." My mother gasped. But she gave it to me. It was a gift." Rick scrolled down the list. "Legally, it was a furnishing provided for the tenant's use during the lease. The lease is void. The use is revoked." He pointed to the 85-inch flat-screen television mounted on the wall. "That television, Jada paid for it." He pointed to the crystal vase on the mantelpiece. "That baccarat crystal, Jada paid for it." He pointed to the Persian rug that Hunter had been so worried about getting dirty. "That rug cost $12,000. Jada paid for it." My mother looked around the room wild-eyed. She ran to the dining room cabinet. "What about my china? My Royal Dalton china?" Rick checked the list. "Purchased Christmas of 2020. Buyer, Jada Washington. It stays." Shirley sank onto the sofa she was no longer allowed to own. Tears streamed down her face. "Well, what can we take?" she sobbed. "What is ours?" Rick scrolled to the very bottom of the list. He looked up and gestured to a pile of dusty boxes in the corner of the garage that the movers had brought in. "You may take personal clothing that was not purchased with the company card. You may take toiletries. And according to my records, you own a toaster from 1998 and a box of VHS tapes. Oh, and the mattress in the guest room, the one with the broken spring. You paid for that one yourself 10 years ago." The reality hit them like a physical blow. For 5 years, they had been living in a showroom of wealth, funded entirely by the daughter they despised. They didn't own the luxury. They were just guests in it. By the time the hour was up, the moving truck was almost empty. They walked out of the house carrying black garbage bags filled with old clothes and cheap trinkets. Behind them, the house stood stripped and bare. The grand living room was empty. The walls were bare. Without their noise and their clutter, the house felt massive and cold. It wasn't a home anymore. It was just a building. And they were just people standing in the snow with nothing but their pride, which was worth absolutely nothing. The high-pitched whine of the industrial drill pierced the frozen silence of the morning. It was the sound of a life ending. A locksmith in blue coveralls was methodically removing the expensive smart lock that Hunter had bragged about installing last summer. He worked with the indifference of a man who was just doing a job, unaware that he was sealing the fate of the 4 people shivering behind him. Standing at the end of the driveway, huddled together like refugees in their own front yard, were my parents, my sister, and Hunter. The karmic irony was almost too perfect. Just 24 hours earlier, they had forced my 8-year-old daughter to stand in this exact spot, shivering in the cold, because her boots were not good enough for their floors. They had laughed then. They had felt powerful then. Now they were the ones shivering, their breath puffing out in white clouds of despair. The sheriff had released Hunter from the back of the cruiser after issuing a citation for disorderly conduct. He was free to go, but he had nowhere to go. His company car had been towed an hour ago, leaving them stranded. Hunter rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had pinched him, his face a mask of dark, thunderous fury. He looked at the house, the beautiful colonial mansion that he had treated as his personal kingdom. The windows were dark. The door was now fitted with a heavy-duty deadbolt that he did not have the key to. He looked at the neighbors who were still watching from their porches, phones raised, recording every second of their downfall. The humiliation was eating him alive. He needed a target. He needed someone to blame for the fact that his life had imploded in the span of 12 hours. He couldn't reach me. I was a ghost in a penthouse. So he turned on the only victim available. Hunter spun around and grabbed Chanel by the arm, his fingers digging into the sleeve of her thin coat. "This is your fault," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. Chanel flinched, her eyes wide with terror. "Hunter, please," she whimpered. "My feet are freezing. We need to call a taxi." "I don't care about your feet," Hunter roared, shoving her backward. She stumbled, losing her balance and falling against my mother, who was too weak to catch her. They both nearly collapsed into the snowbank. "Look at you," Hunter sneered, looking down at them with pure disgust. "You are pathetic. You told me you came from money. You told me your sister was a loser. You lied to me, Chanel. You and your useless parents lied to me every single day." "Hunter, stop it," my father Desmond said, trying to muster some authority. "We are all victims here. Jada deceived us all." "Shut up, old man," Hunter snapped. "Jada didn't deceive you. Jada outsmarted you. She owns you. And because of your stupidity, I have lost my house, my car, and probably my job. I married you, Chanel, because I thought you brought value to the table. I thought you had status. But look at you now. You are just a fraud with a fake handbag standing on a curb." Chanel began to sob loudly, the ugly sound echoing in the cold air. "Hunter, please, don't say that. We are a team." "We are not a team," Hunter said, turning his back on them. "I am a victim of your family's fraud. I am going to a hotel. Do not follow me. I need to call my lawyer and figure out how to divorce myself from this wreckage before you drag me down any further." He started walking down the snowy street alone, leaving his wife and her parents standing by their garbage bags abandoned in the cold. About 50 yards down the street, parked discreetly behind a row of snow-covered pine trees, sat a phantom black Bentley flying spur. The engine was running, but it was silent, a beast waiting in the shadows. Inside the cabin, the temperature was a perfect 72 degrees, and the air smelled of expensive leather and conditioned oxygen. I sat in the back seat wearing dark, oversized sunglasses that hid my eyes. I was not there to gloat. I was not there to roll down the window and scream at them. I was there to witness the execution of justice. Through the tinted glass, I watched the final act of the tragedy play out. I saw my mother crying into a black plastic garbage bag, her posture slumped in defeat. I saw my father staring blankly at the house he had pretended to own for decades, looking like a captain whose ship had sunk beneath his feet. And I saw Hunter walking away alone down the icy street, a man who had lost his kingdom because he refused to be kind to an 8-year-old child. It was a pathetic sight. A small part of me, the old Jada, wanted to feel sorry for them. But then I remembered the cold soup. I remembered the way they laughed when the door slammed in my face. The pity evaporated instantly, leaving only a cold resolve. Rick Sterling, my lawyer, finished locking the front door with the new heavy-duty padlock. He walked down the driveway, stepping over the torn pieces of the voided lease agreement. He stopped at the end of the curb and looked down the street toward my car. He couldn't see me through the blackout tint, but he knew I was there. He gave a single sharp nod. It was a professional signal. It was done. The house was secured. The toxic element had been removed. I didn't wave back. I simply pressed the button on the armrest, and the privacy partition slid up. I didn't need to see any more. "Drive," I said softly to the driver. The Bentley pulled away from the curb, the tires crunching softly on the snow. We glided past my family. They were too busy arguing and shivering to notice the luxury car passing them. They were small figures in the rear-view mirror, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared completely into the white landscape. I turned my head forward. I was not looking back. Not ever again. Sitting across from me was Marcus, my executive assistant, who had been working remotely from the car all morning. He opened a leather portfolio and pulled out a thick red folder that looked ominously heavy. "Madam Marcus," said his voice low and professional. "We received the forensic accounting report on Hunter's firm this morning. The private investigators were very thorough. The discrepancies are significant. Hunter has been embezzling funds for unauthorized travel and luxury goods for at least 2 years. In fact, the catering for last night's dinner was paid for with a stolen corporate card." Marcus held the file out to me. "Shall I forward this to the FBI and his board of directors immediately? We can have him arrested before noon." I took the file and ran my fingers over the edge. Sending it now would be mercy. It would end his suffering quickly. It would give him a definitive end. But I didn't want to give him certainty. I wanted him to sweat. I wanted him to spend the weekend in a cheap motel, thinking he might still have a job to go back to. I wanted him to construct lies and excuses, only to have them crushed the moment he stepped into the office. I took a sip of sparkling water and smiled a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Marcus," I said, placing the file on the seat beside me. "Not yet. Let him have the weekend to stew. Let him think he can talk his way out of it. We send it on Monday morning at 9 sharp. I want to be sitting in the boardroom when the FBI walks in. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes that the axe isn't just falling. It is already buried in his neck." Monday morning arrived with a cold, gray sky that matched the concrete walls of the cheap motel where Hunter had spent the weekend. But Hunter Brooks did not look like a man who had just lost his home. He stood in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, tightening the Windsor knot of his silk tie with surgical precision. He splashed cold water on his face, washing away the hangover and the humiliation of the last 48 hours. As he looked at his reflection, the arrogance that had been momentarily shattered by the eviction began to glue itself back together. He convinced himself that Jada was nothing more than a lucky lottery winner. Sure, she had money. Sure, she had bought his house. But this was the tech industry. This was his world. Jada was just a logistics girl, a glorified warehouse manager. She didn't know how the real corporate game was played. She didn't have the ear of Mr. Sterling like he did. He was the director of sales. He was the rainmaker. Without him, the quarterly targets would crumble. He grabbed his briefcase and walked out to the rental car, a cramped economy sedan that smelled of stale cigarettes. He sneered at it. Just a temporary setback, he told himself. By noon, he would have Sterling wrapped around his finger again. He had rehearsed his story perfectly. Jada was mentally unstable. She was off her medication. The foreclosure was a vindictive prank, and the documents were forged. He would paint himself as the victim of a deranged sister-in-law. Sterling would believe him. Sterling always believed the numbers, and Hunter's numbers were good. He drove into the city practicing his winning smile in the rearview mirror. When he pulled up to the gleaming glass tower of Sterling Technologies, he felt a surge of power. This was his kingdom. He tossed the keys to the valet, who looked at the cheap rental car with confusion, but Hunter walked past him without a word, chin held high. He strode through the revolving doors and into the lobby. The air was cool and smelled of expensive coffee and ambition. He nodded at the receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who usually greeted him with a flirtatious smile. Today, she didn't look up. She was typing furiously, and when he passed her desk, she picked up the phone and whispered something into the receiver. Hunter ignored it. She was probably just busy. He marched toward the elevator bank where the other executives were gathering. He adjusted his cufflinks, preparing to hold court. He saw the VP of marketing standing by the turnstiles and opened his mouth to make a joke about the weekend, but the VP turned his back abruptly, pretending to study a potted plant. Hunter frowned. Strange. But it didn't matter. He stepped up to the security gate and pulled his ID badge from his pocket. He tapped it against the scanner with a confident flick of his wrist, expecting the satisfying green light and the soft chime that welcomed him every morning. Instead, there was a harsh, discordant buzz. A red light flashed on the console. Hunter paused. He wiped the card on his expensive suit jacket and tapped it again, harder this time. Buzz. Red light. He let out a sigh of annoyance loud enough for the people behind him to hear. Unbelievable, he muttered. These machines are garbage. Hey, Ralph! He waved at the security guard who had been manning the front desk for 10 years. Ralph was a heavy-set man who usually joked with Hunter about football. But today, Ralph didn't smile. He walked slowly out from behind the desk, his hand resting on his belt. He didn't look at Hunter as a friend. He looked at him as a threat. "Open the gate," Ralph Hunter commanded, tapping his card impatiently. "My badge is demagnetized again. I have a meeting with Sterling in 10 minutes. Ralph stopped 2 feet away. He looked Hunter up and down, his expression unreadable. "It is not demagnetized, Mr. Brooks." Hunter laughed a sharp, barking sound. "Then what is it?" "The system is down. Just let me through." Ralph pointed a thick finger at the small LCD screen on the turnstile reader. "Look at the screen, sir." Hunter looked down. The digital letters were scrolling across the small display, glowing in an angry red. It didn't say error. It didn't say try again. It read simply, "Access denied. Terminated employee. Contact security." Hunter felt the blood drain from his face. Terminated. That was impossible. He hadn't even had a meeting yet. He looked up at Ralph, his voice trembling with a sudden surge of panic that he couldn't suppress. "This is a mistake," Hunter stammered. "Call Mr. Sterling. Tell him I am here."
"I can't do that," Ralph said, crossing his massive arms. "Mr. Sterling is the one who flagged your badge. You are not allowed in the building, Hunter. You need to leave. Now."
The elevator ride up to the 50th floor was suffocatingly silent. 2 large security guards stood on either side of Hunter Brooks, blocking him from pressing any buttons. He tried to maintain his composure, straightening his jacket and running a hand through his hair, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his panic. He told himself this was just standard protocol for a security breach. Once he got into the room and explained everything to Mr. Sterling, this whole nightmare would be over. He would have his badge reactivated, and he would have Jada arrested for fraud. The elevator doors pinged softly and slid open. The guards did not ask him to step out. They grabbed his arms and physically marched him down the hallway toward the main boardroom. This was the glass-walled sanctuary where Hunter had closed his biggest deals, where he had laughed with colleagues and felt like a master of the universe. Now he was being dragged toward it like a prisoner walking to the gallows. One of the guards pushed the heavy glass door open and shoved Hunter inside. "Mr. Sterling!" Hunter blurted out before he even lifted his head. "Thank God. You have to listen to me. There has been a terrible mistake with the security system. And that woman, Jada, she is—" Hunter stopped dead in his tracks. The words died in his throat. The boardroom was freezing cold. Sitting at the long mahogany table were not the usual board members. The room was empty except for 2 people. Mr. Sterling was there, but he was not sitting at the head of the table. He was sitting in a smaller chair on the side, his posture hunched, his face pale and drawn. He looked like a schoolboy waiting to be expelled. Sit at the head of the table in the high-backed leather chair reserved for the chairman was Jada. But this was not the Jada he had kicked out into the snow. This was not the woman in the worn-out sweater. She was wearing a tailored charcoal suit that screamed power. Her hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and she was wearing diamond stud earrings that caught the harsh fluorescent light. She was reading a thick stack of documents, highlighting sections with a red pen. She did not look up when he entered. Hunter blinked, trying to process the image. His brain refused to accept it. "What is she doing here?" Hunter demanded, his voice cracking. "Mr. Sterling, why is the cleaning lady sitting in your chair? Get her out of here. This is confidential company business." Mr. Sterling did not move. He kept his eyes fixed on the polished wood of the table. "She is not the cleaning lady, Hunter," Mr. Sterling whispered. "She is the majority shareholder of the logistics firm that keeps this company alive."
"Shut up and sit down."
Hunter felt his knees go weak. He slumped into the chair at the opposite end of the table, the furthest possible distance from Jada. The distance felt like miles. Jada slowly closed the file she was reading. The sound of the heavy paper cover hitting the table echoed in the silent room. She uncapped a bottle of expensive mineral water and poured a glass. Then she finally lifted her eyes. They were dark, unreadable, and terrifyingly calm. She looked at Hunter, the man who had mocked her poverty for years. She looked at his cheap rental car keys on the table. She looked at his disheveled suit. She reached for a carafe of coffee that was sitting near her elbow. It was a silver pot, but next to it was a stack of styrofoam cups, the kind used in the break room for the junior staff. "Good morning, Hunter," she said, her voice smooth as silk wrapped around a razor blade. "You look tired. Would you like a cup of coffee? I had them bring up the budget blend. You know, the cheap stuff you insist on buying for the warehouse employees because you said they don't know the difference. Drink up. You are going to need the caffeine for what comes next. Hunter held the styrofoam cup, his hands shaking so badly that the lukewarm liquid splashed onto his knuckles, burning him slightly. He did not dare to wipe it off. He tried to speak to formulate one of his famous sales pitches that had charmed people in the past, but his throat felt like it was filled with sand. Jada did not give him time to recover. She picked up a slim silver remote control and pointed it at the massive wall-to-wall screen behind her. The room darkened slightly as the screen flickered to life. A spreadsheet appeared, but it was not the boring columns of numbers Hunter was used to presenting. It was a forensic timeline of theft, color-coded in red. Jada stood up and walked slowly toward the screen, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor like the ticking of a doomsday clock.
"Let us look at your recent expenses, Hunter," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She sounded like a surgeon explaining a tumor. "Here, on October 4th, you charged $12,000 for client retention gifts. You claimed in your report that you bought vintage wine for the CEO of Techstar. But the digital receipt we pulled from the vendor shows a purchase from a website based in Hong Kong, known for selling high-end counterfeit luxury goods. Specifically, an orange Hermes Birkin bag." Mr. Sterling gasped audibly. He looked at Hunter with pure betrayal. "You stole from the company to buy your wife fake purses?" he whispered. "You looked me in the eye and told me our marketing budget was tight while you were accessorizing your family." Hunter opened his mouth to lie, but Jada pressed the button again. A new image appeared. This one was a receipt from Whole Foods dated the previous Wednesday. It was a long list of items, including a premium organic turkey, imported truffles, and 3 bottles of Dom Perignon champagne. The charge was labeled "Office Supplies, Stationery." Jada turned to face him. Her expression was almost amused. "And here's the entry that I find most interesting, Hunter. You expensed the very dinner you kicked me out of. You used Sterling Technologies' money to buy the food that you denied to my daughter. You used company funds to host a party where you humiliated the biggest investor in the firm." She leaned over the table, placing her hands flat on the polished wood, leaning in until she was inches from his sweating face. "You bought that turkey with a corporate card that effectively draws from my capital injection. You forced the majority shareholder to sit in the kitchen next to the garbage can and then threw her out of the house she owns while she was paying for the meal you were eating. Tell me, Hunter, as a director of sales, do you see the logic in that business strategy? Because I am struggling to find the return on investment." Hunter stammered, sweat running down his temple. It was a working dinner, Jada. I was hosting Mr. Sterling. It was legitimate business." Jada smiled, cold and sharp. "Exactly, Hunter. It was business. And in business, when you steal from the boss, you do not get a severance package. You get a prison sentence." Next slide. Hunter looked at the damning receipts glowing on the screen and felt the room spinning. His lungs struggled to pull in air. He realized that Jada was not going to show him mercy. So he turned his desperate gaze toward the only other person in the room, Mr. Sterling, the man he had worshipped for 5 years, the man he had tried to impress with the fake Hermes bag and the expensive dinner. Surely Mr. Sterling would understand. Surely he would see that this was just a family dispute gone wrong. Hunter leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "Mr. Sterling, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "You know me. I am your best earner. I brought in the Techstar account. I have given my life to this company. You cannot let her do this to me over a turkey dinner.
We are friends, sir. We play golf together. You ate at my table. Mr. Sterling slowly turned his chair to face Hunter. For a second, Hunter saw a flicker of something in his eyes, and he hoped it was sympathy. But he was wrong. It was disgust. Mr. Sterling looked at Hunter the way one looks at a disease that needs to be cut out to save the body. He knew that Jada held the fate of the entire company in her hands. If Onyx Logistics pulled their contract, Sterling Technologies would collapse within a month. Mr. Sterling had to make a choice: save his loyal employee or save his own fortune. It wasn't even a choice. Friends. Mr. Sterling repeated the word, tasting it like sour milk. Do not insult me, Hunter. I do not have friends who embezzle company funds. I do not have friends who lie to shareholders. And I certainly do not have friends who treat the chairman of the board like a peasant because they are too arrogant to see the truth. But I did it for the image, Hunter stammered. I did it to make the company look good. You are a disgrace to this company, Mr. Sterling roared, slamming his hand on the table. You made me look like a fool. You invited me into a house you did not own to eat food you did not pay for, and you forced me to witness you abusing the very woman who signs my paychecks. You are not a victim, Hunter. You are a liability, and I cut liabilities. Mr. Sterling reached into his leather briefcase. He did not pull out a performance improvement plan. He did not pull out a suspension notice. He pulled out a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper that had clearly been drafted by legal that very morning. He placed it on the table. He took a pen from his pocket, clicked it open, and signed the bottom line with a violent, jagged scratch. He slid the paper across the long mahogany table. It hissed as it moved, stopping right in front of Hunter's shaking hands. This is your notice of termination, effective immediately for cause, Mr. Sterling said, his voice cold and final. You are fired. And do not think for a second that this ends with you simply walking out the door. Hunter stared at the paper. Terminated. Mr. Sterling stood up, buttoning his jacket. Our legal team is already drafting a civil lawsuit against you, Hunter. We are going to recover every single penny you stole. The travel expenses, the luxury goods, the catering. We will garnish your wages if you ever manage to get another job. We will come after your assets. By the time we are done with you, you will be lucky if you can afford to shop at a dollar store. You will be paying for that Thanksgiving dinner for the rest of your life. The physical removal of Hunter Brooks from the executive floor was not handled with the discretion usually reserved for senior management. Usually, when an executive is let go, they are allowed to resign quietly in the evening to save face. But Jada had given specific instructions that Hunter was not to be afforded any dignity that he had denied others. 2 large security officers stepped forward. They did not ask Hunter to stand up. They hoisted him out of the chair by his armpits. Hunter struggled, his expensive Italian loafers skidding uselessly on the polished floor. Wait! He shouted, his voice echoing in the glass hallway. I need my things! I have personal files! I have photos of my family in my office! You have nothing, Jada said from the head of the table. She didn't even turn around to watch him go. Everything in that office is company property, including the photos frame. Get him out. The guards dragged Hunter to the elevator. One of them reached out and ripped the plastic ID badge from Hunter's lapel. The sound of the clip snapping was the sound of his identity being severed. Without that badge, he was just a man in a rumpled suit with no power and no future. The elevator ride down was silent, but when the doors opened into the main lobby, Hunter's nightmare truly began. It was lunch hour. The lobby was packed with hundreds of employees. Sales representatives, assistants, interns, and maintenance staff were crisscrossing the atrium. When the security guards marched Hunter out, holding him firmly by the arms, the entire lobby went quiet. It was a hush of collective shock, followed immediately by the buzz of recognition. This was Hunter Brooks, the tyrant of the sales department, the man who fired people for looking at him wrong, the man who made jokes about affirmative action hires. Hunter tried to hold his head up to pretend this was just a misunderstanding, but nobody was buying it. Then the phones came out. It started with one intern near the fountain, then a group of secretaries by the front desk. Within seconds, a sea of smartphones was raised, recording the downfall of the office bully. Hunter saw the flashes. He saw the smirks. He saw the justice in their eyes. "Please," he hissed at the guards trying to hide his face. "Take me out the back way. Don't parade me like this." The guards ignored him, marching him straight down the center aisle toward the revolving doors. Just before they reached the exit, a figure stepped into their path. It was Marcus, the head of the janitorial staff. Marcus was an older black man with gray hair and a gentle demeanor. For 3 years, Hunter had treated Marcus like furniture. He had yelled at him for mopping too loudly. He had called him boy in front of clients. He had kicked over a trash can once just to watch Marcus pick it up. Hunter stopped. He looked at Marcus, expecting the man to move aside. Marcus did not move. He stood tall, holding a flattened, beat-up cardboard box that had been pulled from the recycling bin. It was stained with coffee rings and torn at the corner. Marcus looked Hunter in the eye. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He simply tossed the dirty cardboard box at Hunter's feet. "You are going to need this for your things, boss," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent lobby. The lobby erupted in laughter. It wasn't polite laughter. It was the raucous, liberating laughter of people watching a dictator fall. Hunter stared at the box. He wanted to kick it. He wanted to scream. But the guards shoved him forward, pushing him through the revolving doors and out onto the cold concrete of the street. He stumbled, landing hard on his knees. The glass doors spun shut behind him, sealing him out of the world he used to rule. The heavy glass doors of the Sterling Technologies building swung shut behind Hunter, sealing him out of the only world that mattered to him. He stood alone on the gray concrete of the New York City sidewalk. The biting wind whipped around the skyscrapers, cutting through his expensive suit jacket, which suddenly felt very thin and inadequate against the coming winter. People walked past him briskly, ignoring the man who had just been thrown out of the lobby like a piece of unwanted trash. Hunter adjusted his tie, trying to salvage some shred of dignity, but his hands were shaking uncontrollably. He reached into his pocket to check his phone, hoping for a miracle. Maybe it was a text from Mr. Sterling saying it was all a test. Maybe it was a message from a headhunter. But the screen was filled with a different kind of notification. It was an alert from the First National Bank Auto Finance Division. The message was brief and brutal. It stated that, due to a sudden change in his employment status and the filing of a civil lawsuit against him, a cross-default clause in his loan agreement had been triggered. His personal pride and joy, the Porsche 911 that he had parked in his garage at the apartment complex, was no longer his. The bank had issued an immediate repossession order. The car was being towed at that very moment. Hunter stared at the screen. He had paid $50,000 in down payments for that car. It was his symbol of success. It was the only thing he had left to show the world that he was a winner. And just like that, it was gone, evaporated into the ether of debt and legal clauses. He was standing in the middle of Manhattan with no job, no home, no car, and a negative bank balance. The phone buzzed again in his hand, startling him. This time it was a call. The caller ID showed a picture of Chanel. She looked happy in the photo, smiling and holding a glass of champagne from better days. Hunter answered the phone, pressing it against his ear to hear over the roar of the city traffic. "Chanel?" he snapped, his voice harsh with stress. "Do not ask me for money. I just lost the car." "I just lost everything." He expected her to be whining about her shoes or the cold, but instead he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. Chanel was screaming. It wasn't a tantrum scream. It was a scream of pure, unadulterated terror. "Hunter, you have to help us," she cried, her voice breaking into hysterical sobs. "We're at the motel. It is Daddy." "What about your father?" Hunter asked, gripping the phone tighter. "He just collapsed," Chanel wailed. "We were arguing about the luggage and he just grabbed his chest and fell over. He is not moving, Hunter. His face is gray. Mommy is shaking him, but he won't wake up." "Call 911, Hunter shouted. "Call an ambulance, you idiot!" "I did," Chanel sobbed. "But the operator said there is a wait time for the city ambulance because of the snowstorm. They said it could be 20 minutes. "Then call the private service," Hunter yelled. "Call the concierge medical team we use, the one with the helicopter." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. When Chanel spoke again, her voice was a whisper of absolute defeat. "I called them Hunter. They asked for a credit card number up front. I tried yours, I tried Daddy's, I tried mine. They all declined. Every single one. They said they cannot dispatch a unit without a valid payment method." Hunter stood frozen on the sidewalk. The realization hit him like a physical blow. They were not just broke. They were destitute. "Hunter," Chanel pleaded. "What do we do? He is dying right here on the carpet. We don't have the money to save him." Hunter looked at the phone, then at the cold, indifferent glass tower behind him. He realized with horror that the only person in the world who could save them was the woman they had destroyed. The room at the Golden Horizon Motel smelled of stale cigarette smoke and damp carpet, a scent that seemed to seep into the very pores of the skin. It was a single room with 2 double beds that sagged in the middle, pushing 4 adult bodies into an intimate proximity that bred nothing but contempt. Outside, a broken neon sign buzzed incessantly, flickering a sickly yellow light through the thin, grease-stained curtains every 3 seconds. It was a far cry from the velvet furniture and crystal chandeliers of the Greenwich estate they had occupied just 48 hours ago. My father, Desmond, was lying on the bed nearest the radiator, which was hissing and clanking like a dying engine. He looked small and frail, stripped of his expensive suits and his arrogance. The fainting spell had left him weak, but since they could not afford the private hospital admission fee, and the wait at the public emergency room was 6 hours, he was surviving on pharmacy-brand aspirin and a bottle of lukewarm tap water. He groaned softly, complaining about the lumpy mattress, but nobody moved to help him. The sympathy in this family had evaporated the moment the credit cards were declined. Chanel was sitting on the dirty linoleum floor in front of the cracked bathroom mirror. She was weeping not for her sick father, but for her complexion. She held a small plastic bottle upside down, shaking it violently. It was the last of her $300 night cream, and it was empty. She threw the bottle against the wall, where it bounced off the peeling beige wallpaper with a hollow thud. "Look at this!" she wailed, her voice shrill and grating in the small space. "My skin is going to dry out. I am going to get wrinkles, Hunter. Do you hear me? I will look like a hag before I am 30 because you couldn't keep a simple job. We are using soap that smells like industrial cleaner. Do you have any idea what that does to my pores? My mother, Shirley, who was sitting on the edge of the other bed, turned her gaze toward Hunter. Her eyes were not the eyes of a loving mother-in-law. They were the eyes of a predator looking at a failed investment. She didn't comfort her daughter. She attacked the weakest link. You promised us security, Shirley hissed. You told us you were the director of sales. You told us you were indispensable. But you were just a thief, weren't you? You stole from Jada. You stole from the company. And now you have stolen my dignity. I am sleeping on sheets that haven't been washed properly in a room that costs $40 a night. This is your fault, Hunter. You are useless. Hunter, who was standing by the window staring out at the bleak parking lot, spun around. His face was twisted with hatred. Don't you dare lecture me, Shirley. You were happy enough to eat the food I bought with that stolen money. You were happy enough to drink the champagne. You knew I was overspending. You encouraged it. You wanted the country club lifestyle, but you didn't have a dime to pay for it. You and your husband are parasites. You attached yourselves to me and sucked me dry. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence broken only by the buzzing of the neon sign. In that cheap, dirty motel room, the illusion of the Washington family finally dissolved. There was no love here. There was no loyalty. There was only a group of selfish strangers trapped together in a cage of their own making, waiting for the next meal they couldn't afford to buy, and realizing, with dawning horror, that they would have to eat each other to survive. The silence in the cramped motel room was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the sound of the radiator hissing steam into the dry air. Hunter was pacing by the window, looking at the empty parking spot where his Porsche used to be, while my father, Desmond, lay groaning on the bed, nursing his pride along with his health. Chanel sat on the stained carpet, surrounded by her useless beauty products. Her face was streaked with tears and mascara. But suddenly, her sobbing stopped. She sat up straight, her eyes narrowing as a new thought took hold in her mind. It was the look of a predator spotting a wounded animal. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and looked at her mother. "Wait a minute," Chanel said, her voice losing its whine and gaining a sharp edge of calculation. "We are going about this all wrong. We are trying to fight Jada. But Jada is cold. Jada is stone. She doesn't care about us anymore." She stood up, dusting the lint off her designer leggings. "But you know who isn't stone? You know who is soft and weak and easy to break? Maya." Hunter turned from the window, his brow furrowed. "The kid, what about her? Jada has her on lockdown." Chanel began to pace the small room, her excitement growing with every step. "Jada might have blocked our numbers, but she can't block the real world. Maya goes to that private school in the city, the one Jada pays a fortune for. I know exactly where the pickup line is. I know exactly what time school gets out." My mother, Shirley, sat up on the edge of the bed. Her eyes, which had been dull with despair, suddenly sparked with a glimmer of malicious hope. "Chanel, what are you thinking?" Chanel smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. "Maya loves me, Mommy. She always has. Remember how she used to follow me around, hoping I would play with her? She is desperate for our approval. If I show up at her school tomorrow, waiting by the gate, looking sad and crying, she will break." Chanel gestured with her hands, acting out the scene she was creating in her head. I will tell her that Grandma and Grandpa are sick. I will tell her we are sleeping on the floor and we have no food. I will cry my eyes out. Maya has a bleeding heart, just like Jada used to. She will beg her mother to help us. She will scream and cry until Jada opens the wallet just to shut her up. My mother nodded slowly, a look of relief washing over her face. You are right, Chanel. It is brilliant.
Jada might hate us, but she cannot say no to her own daughter.
If Maya demands that we come back, Jada will have to cave in. Hunter looked at them, skepticism written on his face. You want to ambush an 8-year-old at her elementary school. That sounds risky. What if security sees you? Chanel scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. I am her aunt, Hunter. It is not illegal to say hello to my niece. Besides, I won't cause a scene. I will just be the heartbroken family member who was cruelly cut off. I will make sure the other mothers see me too. I will make sure the teachers see how pitiful we look. Shame is a powerful weapon, Hunter, and we are going to use it. Shirley stood up and walked over to Chanel, hugging her tightly. That is my smart girl. It is the right thing to do. After all, we are family. Blood is thicker than water. Maya belongs to us, too. We have a right to see her. And if seeing her gets us back into a warm house, then it is what we have to do.
The mood in the room shifted instantly.
The despair was gone, replaced by a toxic energy. They didn't see themselves as monsters planning to manipulate a child. They saw themselves as victims, finally striking back. They began to plan their outfits to look sympathetic but dignified. They rehearsed their lines. They prepared to weaponize an innocent child's love to reclaim a life they had done nothing to earn. The absolute shamelessness of their plan filled the room, darker and dirtier than the mold in the corners. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip, casting long shadows over the wrought iron gates of the exclusive St. Augustine Academy. The sidewalk was crowded with parents in cashmere coats waiting for their children, but two figures stood out like sore thumbs. Chanel and Shirley were huddled near a stone pillar, shivering in the cold wind. They had tried to dress respectably, but their clothes were wrinkled from being stuffed in garbage bags, and their faces were gaunt with stress. They looked like desperate ghosts haunting the world of the living. Chanel kept checking her watch, her eyes darting frantically at every luxury car that passed. Suddenly, she gripped her mother's arm. There, she hissed, pointing a shaking finger. That is the car. A sleek, phantom black Bentley pulled up to the curb, gliding to a stop with silent authority. It was a vehicle that screamed power and protection. The rear door did not open immediately. First, a large man in a dark suit stepped out from the front passenger seat. He scanned the sidewalk, his eyes lingering on Chanel and Shirley for a second, before he turned to open the back door. Maya stepped out. She looked like a different child from the one who had cried over a bowl of soup. She was wearing her crisp navy blue school uniform and a warm wool coat that looked incredibly soft. She carried a leather backpack, and her hair was braided neatly with blue ribbons. She looked healthy, loved, and secure. Chanel didn't wait. Before the bodyguard could close the door, she lunged forward, dragging Shirley with her. They put on the performance of a lifetime. Maya, baby Chanel, cried out, her voice cracking with theatrical emotion. Oh, thank God, we found you! They rushed toward the little girl, falling to their knees on the cold concrete in front of her. It was a scene designed to draw attention, and it worked. Other parents stopped talking and turned to watch. Shirley reached out her hands, trembling, grasping at the air near Maya's coat. Grandma is so sorry, baby Shirley sobbed, tears streaming down her face. We have been so worried about you. We miss you so much. Grandpa is sick, Maya. He is lying in a cold room and we have no food. We just want to see you. We just want to hug you." Chanel opened her arms wide, forcing a pitiful smile. "Come here, sweetie. Come give Auntie Chanel a big hug. Tell your mommy that we love her. Tell her we are sorry. We are family, Maya. We need you." The bodyguard stepped forward, his hand rising to push them back. But Maya held up a small gloved hand to stop him. She stood perfectly still. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She looked down at the two women kneeling on the sidewalk with an expression that was terrifyingly calm for an 8-year-old. Chanel's smile faltered. "Maya, honey, come here." "Why are you looking at me like that?" Maya took a deliberate step backward. She looked at her aunt's expensive-looking but fake boots. Then she looked at her grandmother's tear-stained face. "I am not hugging you," Maya said, clearly, her voice carrying over the wind. Shirley gasped, clutching her chest. "Maya, how can you say that? We are your blood." Maya shook her head. "No. You are the people who laughed at me. I remember Thanksgiving. I remember the cold soup you gave me near the trash can. You told Mommy that the turkey was only for people who paid for it." The crowd of parents nearby began to murmur. Chanel looked around, panic rising in her chest. She tried one last time, desperate to regain control. "That was just a joke, Maya. We were playing." Maya narrowed her eyes. "It wasn't funny. I was hungry, and I was cold, and you didn't care. Now you are hungry and cold. I think you should go eat your soup." Maya turned her back on them. She looked up at her bodyguard and gave a small nod. "Let's go," she said. The bodyguard stepped between the women and the child, his broad back forming an impenetrable wall. He escorted Maya through the school gates, leaving Chanel and Shirley kneeling on the pavement, humiliated and empty-handed, as the heavy iron gates slammed shut with a final resounding clang. Chanel scrambled to her feet, ignoring the dirt staining the knees of her leggings. She lunged forward again, her hand catching the sleeve of Maya's coat before the bodyguard could intercept. Her desperation had stripped away all her pride, leaving only a raw and ugly panic. "Wait, Maya, please! Listen to me!" Chanel pleaded, her voice shrill and trembling. "You do not understand. We are actually starving. We haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days. Look at Grandma. She is old, Maya. She cannot survive out here in the cold. Do you want Grandma to get sick? Do you want her to die because you were too stubborn to ask your mommy a simple favor?" My mother, Shirley, joined in, sensing that this was their final chance. She clasped her hands together in a begging motion, tears streaming down her face that were half real and half performance. "Baby, look at us," Shirley sobbed. "We are shaking. We have nowhere to go. If you just tell your mother to let us back in, she will listen to you. You are her world. Just say you miss us. Just say you want Grandma home. Do it for me, baby. Do it because you are a good girl, and good girls help their family." Maya stopped. She turned around slowly. She didn't look like a child being scolded. She looks like a miniature version of Jada in the boardroom. She looked at Chanel's desperate, grasping hands, and then up at her grandmother's teary eyes. Her expression was not angry, nor was it sad. It was the look of someone who finally sees the truth clearly. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs. "You keep saying we are family," Maya said, her voice steady and clear, cutting through the cold wind. "You say it over and over again like it is a magic word that fixes everything. But Mommy told me something important last night. She sat me down and she told me that family is a verb. It is something you do, not something you are. Family means people who love you and protect you. Maya paused, looking directly at Shirley. But you guys never protected us. You watched Uncle Hunter scream at me, and you didn't say stop. You watched us walk out into the snow, and you laughed. Mommy says that real family doesn't let you starve. Real family doesn't make you sit by the trash can. You keep saying you love us, but Mommy says you only loved her money. You loved the house. You loved the cars. You never loved us. Shirley gasped, her face going pale. Maya, that is not true. I am your grandmother. Maya shook her head firmly. No, you are not my grandmother. My grandmother would have given me her chair. My grandmother would have given me her soup. You are just the lady who yelled at me for dropping a spoon. I don't have a grandmother anymore. The words hit Shirley harder than a physical blow. She stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. The large bodyguard had heard enough. He stepped between them, breaking Chanel's grip on Maya's coat with a swift, professional motion. He loomed over the two women, his shadow covering them like a dark cloud. "Step back, immediately," he commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "You are currently harassing a minor. I have everything recorded on my body camera. If you attempt to touch her again, or if you show up at this school one more time, I will not call the police for a wellness check. I will call them to file charges for attempted kidnapping and stalking. Do you understand?" He didn't wait for an answer. He placed a protective hand on Maya's shoulder and guided her into the waiting car. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing the warmth inside and leaving Chanel and Shirley standing on the sidewalk, shivering in the cold wind of their own making. Back in the dingy motel room, Chanel decided to play her final and dirtiest card. She set up her phone against a stack of takeout containers and hit record. She didn't put on makeup. She let her hair look greasy and messy to sell the narrative of a woman on the edge. She looked into the camera with wide, tear-filled eyes and lied through her teeth. "Guys, I didn't want to share this," she whispered, her voice trembling perfectly. "But I have no choice. My sister, Jada, she is a billionaire who kicked us out." And the stress was too much. I was pregnant, guys. I was 12 weeks along, and because of the cold and the hunger, I think I lost the baby. She killed my baby. She hit post. The video went viral instantly. The internet loves a victim. Comments flooded in calling Jada a monster and a child killer. People were tagging Onyx Logistics, demanding a boycott. In her penthouse office, Jada watched the video on her tablet. Her assistant looked worried, but Jada just took a sip of her tea. Her expression wasn't fear, it was amusement. "So she wants to play the media game," Jada said softly, putting the tablet down. "She wants to talk about medical history. Fine. Let us give the public the truth." The lie Chanel told on social media was the final straw for Desmond's failing heart. Sitting on the edge of the lumpy motel bed, watching the live stream comments turn violent, he gasped, clutching his chest as his face turned a terrifying shade of gray. This was not a performance for sympathy. It was a massive cardiac arrest. While Chanel screamed for help, Hunter did the only thing he knew how to do. He looked at the chaos and realized the police would be coming for Chanel's fraud. "I cannot be here," he muttered, grabbing his duffel bag. He slammed the door and ran into the night, leaving his dying father-in-law behind. The ambulance ride to the county hospital was a nightmare. There were no private suites here, only a chaotic hallway filled with moaning patients and the smell of antiseptic. A doctor with dark circles under his eyes approached Shirley, holding a clipboard. "Your husband has a severe blockage," he said, his voice flat and exhausted. "He needs emergency bypass surgery immediately, or he will not survive the night. The cost is $50,000. Since you have no insurance, we need a payment guarantee right now." Shirley stood in the harsh fluorescent glare, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She looked at Desmond, gasping for air on a gurney in the corridor. She had no pride left. With shaking fingers, she dialed Jada's number one last time, praying that for a matter of life and death, the line would finally be open. The sliding glass doors of the overcrowded county emergency room parted, and silence seemed to ripple through the chaos. Jada stepped inside, wearing a tailored black trench coat and dark sunglasses that shielded her eyes from the harsh fluorescent glare. She looked like a shadow moving through a world of gray misery. My mother, Shirley, who had been weeping into a tissue, saw her and threw herself onto the dirty linoleum floor. She grabbed the hem of Jada's coat, sobbing hysterically. "Please, Jada, save your father. He is dying and they will not touch him without money. You are the only one who can help us." Jada did not reach down to comfort her mother. She stood tall and immovable, like a marble statue. She looked over her mother's head at the weary doctor holding the clipboard. "Run the card," Jada said calmly, pulling a sleek black credit card from her pocket. The doctor looked relieved, taking the card to the terminal. Shirley tried to kiss Jada's hand, but Jada pulled away sharply, as if she had been touched by something unclean. "Do not mistake this for forgiveness," Jada said, her voice ice cold. "I am paying this bill for one reason only. I am saving his life today so that I never owe him anything ever again. Consider his debt paid in full. Once this surgery is done, we are strangers." The sterile, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the recovery room. Desmond blinked his eyes open slowly, trying to focus through the heavy haze of anesthesia. He saw a figure standing by the window, bathed in the cold city light. It was Jada. She was watching him, not with the concern of a daughter, but with the clinical detachment of an auditor inspecting a damaged asset. Desmond tried to lift his hand, but it was too heavy. His voice was a dry rasp. "Jada," he whispered, tears pooling in his eyes. "I am so sorry. I was wrong. We treated you so badly. Please forgive your old father." Jada walked over to the bedside. She did not take his hand. She did not smooth his pillow. Instead, she leaned down until her face was inches from his. Her perfume smelled expensive and sharp, cutting through the antiseptic air. "Save your breath, old man," she said, her voice soft and terrifyingly calm. "You are not apologizing because you feel remorse. You are apologizing because you are afraid of dying. You are sorry because you lost the game. But do not worry about the hospital bill. I paid the $50,000. Your heart is beating right now solely because I purchased the surgery. Your life does not belong to God anymore, Desmond. It belongs to me." Desmond stared at her, wide-eyed, realizing with horror that he was no longer a father. He was just another receipt in her ledger. He closed his eyes, and a single tear of pure despair rolled down his cheek into the pillow. Hunter crept into the hospital waiting area like a rat scurrying in the shadows. He saw Chanel slumped in a plastic chair, exhausted and asleep, with her purse loosely gripped in her hand. He didn't care that his father-in-law was in surgery. He only cared that he needed cash to get out of the state. He reached out his sweating hand, trembling as he tried to slide the bag from her grip. He was robbing his own wife. It was the lowest moment of his life, but he was desperate.
"Freeze!"
a booming voice shouted. Hunter spun around, dropping the bag. 4 federal agents in tactical vests were blocking the exit. They moved in with practiced speed, slamming Hunter against the vending machine. The impact echoed through the quiet hallway, waking Chanel with a start.
"Hunter Brooks, you are under arrest," the lead agent declared, snapping the handcuffs tight around his wrists. "We have a warrant for multiple counts of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and tax evasion." The evidence provided by the forensic team at Onyx Logistics is conclusive. Hunter struggled as they dragged him toward the exit, his feet dragging on the linoleum. He looked down the hall and saw Jada standing calmly by the elevator doors, watching him. "Jada!" he screamed, his voice cracking with rage and fear. "You did this! You planned this! Jada!" His screams faded as the automatic doors swallowed him, leaving only the silence of justice served. My mother and sister stood in the hospital hallway, looking like ghosts of their former selves. Hope flickered in their eyes when they saw the thick blue folder in my hand. They thought it was a settlement. They thought it was a check to restart their lives. They were wrong. Shirley reached out her hands, trembling with greed disguised as gratitude. She grabbed the folder and tore it open, expecting to see a bank transfer, but there were no numbers inside. There was only a court seal and pages of legal text. Chanel looked over her shoulder, reading the bold letters at the top, and gasped in horror. It was not a lifeline. It was a permanent restraining order, signed by a judge less than an hour ago. "This is the last thing you will ever receive from me," I said, my voice steady and final. "It effectively bars you from coming within 1 kilometer of myself, my daughter Maya, or any property owned by Onyx Logistics. If you violate this order, if you try to approach Maya at school or show up at my office, you will be arrested immediately. You will share a cell block with Hunter." I didn't wait for them to argue. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit, the sound of my heels clicking on the floor, marking the end of a lifetime of abuse. "Goodbye," I said without looking back. And for the first time in my life, I finally felt free. 2 weeks later, the heavy iron gates of the new estate swung shut, locking out the world and its noise. Inside the sprawling living room of the penthouse overlooking Central Park, the air smelled of cinnamon sticks and fresh pine needles. A fire was crackling in the massive stone hearth, casting a warm golden glow over the room. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in Maya's life, there was no tension. There was no shouting. There was no fear of being scolded for laughing too loud. Maya was sitting on a thick Persian rug, surrounded by torn wrapping paper. She was laughing a sound so pure and unburdened that it made my heart ache with gratitude. She wasn't playing alone. Marcus, my executive assistant, was sitting on the floor with her, wearing a ridiculous sweater with a reindeer on it, helping her assemble a complex Lego castle. Rick, my lawyer, was sitting on the sofa holding a glass of aged scotch and actually smiling, something I didn't think he was capable of. These people were not my blood. They did not share my DNA, but they were the ones who had stood by me when the world fell apart. They were the ones who protected my daughter. I walked over to the dining table, which was laden with food. There was a massive roast turkey steaming hot with all the trimmings. There were crystal bowls filled with mashed potatoes and gravy. But this time, no one was being sent to the kitchen. No one was eating cold soup. The table was set for everyone. The driver, the housekeeper, Marcus, Rick, and Maya. We were all sitting together. We were all equals.
I poured myself a glass of deep red wine and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, the snow was falling softly, covering New York City in a blanket of white. It looked peaceful. It looked clean. I thought about where I was a month ago, shivering in a coat that wasn't warm enough, begging for acceptance from people who only saw me as an ATM. I thought about my father, lying in that hospital bed bartering for his life. I thought about Hunter sitting in a jail cell, and Chanel probably shivering in a shelter, realizing that her fake handbags couldn't keep her warm. A vibration on the marble counter broke my reverie. My phone screen lit up. It was a message from an unknown number. I picked it up and read the preview. It was a long, rambling text full of misspellings. Jada, please pick up. It is Mom. We are at a shelter in the Bronx. It is freezing here. People are stealing our shoes. Please, just send us a little cash for a motel, just for Christmas. We are sorry. We love you. I looked at the words. Years ago, that text would have broken me. It would have sent me rushing out into the night, desperate to fix their mess. But tonight, I felt nothing. No anger, no guilt, just a profound sense of detachment. The woman who sent that text was a stranger to me. I didn't reply. I didn't hesitate. I pressed the delete button. Then I went into the settings and blocked the number. Finally, I held down the power button on the side of the phone. The screen went black. I put the dead phone in the drawer and closed it. "Mommy, look!" Maya shouted from the rug, holding up a Lego tower. "I built the castle!" I turned around, leaving the window and the cold night behind. I walked toward the warmth of the fire and the people who actually cared about me. "It is beautiful, baby," I said, raising my glass to them. "Merry Christmas." I took a sip of the wine. It tasted like freedom. I finally understood the truth that had taken me 30 years to learn. Family is not defined by whose blood runs in your veins. Family is defined by who is willing to bleed for you. And for the first time in my life, I was finally home. This story teaches us a brutal but necessary truth. Blood does not guarantee loyalty, and DNA is not a binding contract for abuse. Jada's journey proves that true character is revealed not by how much money you have, but by how you treat those who have nothing. Her family worshipped wealth, but lacked humanity, and that spiritual bankruptcy cost them everything. We learn that family is not just a noun. It is a verb defined by action, protection, and love. Sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is cutting the ties that strangle you to find the people who truly support you. Look around your table tonight and ask yourself, are the people sitting next to you feeding your soul or starving your spirit? Don't be afraid to walk away from a toxic past to build the castle you deserve.